Good evening. I have the pleasure to introduce our speaker, Professor Paul Davies, and probably as a lot of people know, Professor Paul Davies is a British theoretical physicist, a cosmologist, astrobiologist, and a well-known author. He is a resident professor at Arizona State University, where he is the director of the Beyond Center for Fundamental Concepts in Science and co-director of the Cosmology Initiative. He previously held academic appointments in physics, mathematics, and astronomy in UK and Australia. Among his notable research achievements are the discovery that accelerated observers' perceived thermal radiation in a quantum vacuum, the so-called Davies-Unruh effect, the construction of the quantum state, the quantum vacuum state that describes the primordial fluctuations in the cosmic microwave background, and the hypothesis that life on Earth may have come from Mars. He helped to establish the Australian Centre for Astrobiology in Sydney, and in recent days he has been running a major research program on physics and cancer biology, tracing cancer's deep evolutionary roots. Among his various awards, Davies was made a member of the Order of Australia in the 2000 Queen's Birthday Honours List, and the asteroid 6870 Paul Davies is named after him. His latest book is The Eerie Silence. Are we alone in the universe? With all of you, and thanking you, our speaker, Professor Paul Davies.
Well, thank you, Anna Maria, for those kind words of introduction. Ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, good afternoon, and happy birthday to Brazilian physics, 50 years. I thought I'd check on the internet to see what might have happened in the subject I'm going to talk about 50 years ago, and the answer seems to be absolutely nothing of significance, so I'm afraid I can't tell you. In the year 1943, when most of Europe was engulfed in the Second World War, the physicist Erwin Schrödinger, who was sheltering from the Nazis in neutral Ireland, gave a series of lectures in Dublin with the title, What is Life? And this book that is based on the lectures was published by Cambridge University Press the following year. In his lectures, Schrödinger raised two subjects which remain pertinent today. The big questions we would like to ask are, do we need new physics to explain life? And can studying biological organisms, studying life, suggest what new physics that might be? We don't have answers to those questions, but Schrödinger asked them, and he himself clearly thought the answer was yes. So he writes in his book, how can the events in space and time, which take place within the spatial boundary of a living organism, be accounted for by physics and chemistry? And then he went on to say that living matter, while not eluding the laws of physics established to date, is likely to involve other laws of physics, hitherto unknown. So he left open the possibility of new physics operating in living matter. Now, remember that Schrödinger was one of the founders of quantum mechanics, and this was in the 1940s, so fresh from the success of this theory, it was very natural that he and other quantum physicists should think about the nature of life. After all, quantum mechanics had, at a stroke, explained the nature of matter, all the way from the atomic nucleus right up to the structure of stars. So here was a theory sufficiently powerful and sufficiently weird to maybe explain the weird nature of life itself. Some of his colleagues clearly concurred. Einstein, for example, said that one can... excuse me, I'm going to take this out of its cradle. Just hold it like that. Just give me a little bit more flexibility. It just saves me having to lean forward. Oh, even better. This one. Hello, hello? But you need to switch me on. Does that work? Yeah. So Einstein said one can best feel in dealing with living things how primitive physics still is. Wigner raised the possibility of what he called biotonic phenomena that are restricted to life and are new to physics. Whilst Bohr took the point of view that life is an example of the complementarity principle, that we basically have to accept it as a fundamental aspect of life. It's a fundamental aspect of matter, that it's not possible to investigate what's going on inside a living organism in enough detail without killing it. And so he thought that this would be a starting point in biology. Well, I have to say that these ideas that quantum mechanics or some post-quantum mechanics might account for the properties of life have largely not been fulfilled. And several decades later, we're still really baffled by the way that life behaves. So to a physicist, I think life seems almost like magic. And yet we suppose that if we try hard enough, we will have a good account for how living systems operate. So to take a contemporary thinker, the Harvard chemist George Whitesides, he asks in an essay, how remarkable is life? The answer is very. Those of us who deal in networks of chemical reactions know of nothing like it. Or take Stephen Chu, the Nobel Prize winner. Currently, we're still in a hunting and gathering mode with respect to biology. Good data may have to wait for others to see the underlying patterns. And so I want to conjecture that life is a unique fourth state of matter. It's a type of matter which simply is unique in its properties, and we have to somehow accommodate it within the wider scope of physics. Now, this is a great challenge because it's very hard to draw any sort of dividing line between the living and non-living world. So we're pretty sure, the top there, that, for example, the moon wouldn't be living. We wouldn't normally describe the moon as living. But or when we get to things like hurricanes and turbulence, it's not, it's less clear. Cellular life, societies, computers, and so on, these things we feel are clearly living. But it's really very hard to separate one class from the other. What we lack, what would be wonderful to have, is something like a life meter. This would be a device that you plug into a system, and it would tell you not only whether it's living or non-living, but how close to living it might be. That in all the discussion about the nature of life and the origin of life, we really don't know how to think about a system that may be, as it were, getting close to being living, that may have many of the properties associated with the living thing, but is not living. So we don't have this sort of meter. You might think, well, it's a silly concept, and who cares anyway? The answer is NASA, the US Space Agency, certainly cares. And I'll tell you the reason for that. So this is Titan. It's a moon of Jupiter. It's a the atmosphere is a petrochemical smog. The Huygens spacecraft that visited the moon discovered that, well, it's far too cold for life as we know it, but it is rich in organic molecules, and it's been sitting there for 4.5 billion years, so there will be a huge amount of organic chemistry that will have taken place over those 4.5 billion years. And some people have said, well, could there be an exotic form of life on Titan? Well, we don't know the answer to that, but there's another possibility, which is that conditions on Titan are not as favorable for life as they are on Earth, and maybe Titan got part way to the formation of life. Maybe it got 90% of the way, or 99% of the way. But what does that mean? How do we measure how close something is to being living? We can't even grasp the concept of something being almost alive. The other example that NASA is interested in, and this has been presented to us at the Beyond Center at Arizona State University to try to solve, is this object. This is Enceladus. It's a moon of Saturn. And what you can see there is a plumes of material squirting out from the planet. Now this is the moon. So this moon is one of an example of an icy world in which there's a liquid interior called the interior is melted by the tidal stresses of orbiting around Saturn. And so it's got a liquid interior and a solid crust, but the crust is fissured, and this material, the plume, is material squirting out like a pressure cooker. When you release the valve, it's squirting out into space. And the Cassini mission flew through the plume and determined that there are organic molecules. And so that raises the tantalizing possibility that there may be life inside this moon, inside Enceladus. So NASA would like to send a spacecraft with a suite of instruments to fly through the plume again and to sample that material and to ask the question, or answer the question, is there life on Enceladus? But how do you detect life? How do you tell the difference between, say, bacteria which have been shredded by this plume process, and so you've got the innards of these bacteria being squirted out? How do you tell the difference between that and a pressure cooker-like environment in which all sorts of complex organic molecules are formed but never were living? How can you tell the difference between things that were once living, and it's the detritus from once living things, or on the other hand, just complex chemical reactions which have gone part way to forming life? We don't really know how to get to grips with that, and we have no way of measuring. We can take an inventory of these organic molecules, but we have no actual agreed measure on what it takes to determine if something is living or was living, or to distinguish between them. Well, let me turn to the problem of life's origin. How did it all start? Many years ago, Francis Crick said that life on Earth seems almost a miracle. So many are the conditions for it to get going. And this very much reflected the mood at the time in the 1960s and 1970s, that life is so stupendously complex that the chain of events leading up to it would surely have happened only once in the universe. And therefore, in answer to the question, are we alone? The answer would be, surely we are, because for this amazing sequence of events to happen twice seems inconceivable. Well, what can we say about the pathway from non-life to life? The answer is not very much, but the obvious thing would be to ask a chemist. And in a famous experiment in 1952, Stanley Miller, at the instigation of Harold Urey, performed a famous experiment in which he put gases that he thought existed in the atmosphere of the early Earth into a flask with some water and sparked electricity through it for a week or so, and was delighted to find that this mixture of gases formed amino acids, which are the building blocks of proteins. And the feeling at the time was that, well, if Stanley Miller could make amino acids in a week, what might he make in 1,000,000 years? Perhaps if he kept at it for long enough, had a big enough budget, he would be able to truly make life in a test tube. Since then, I think those hopes have faded. The fact that you can make the building blocks of life really doesn't help very much about making life. It's a bit like saying, how did New York City come to exist? And somebody saying, well, I think we've cracked the problem, this is how you make a brick. And so it just doesn't do it for you. The point about life is that, well, 2 points about life. One is that it's incredibly complex. Some of you may have seen this picture. This is a diagram of a part of what is called intermediary metabolism in modern life. And you see the complexity of this chart, which has been painstakingly worked out by researchers over some years, is so complex it's usually referred to as a radiculogram. And so the pathway from non-life to life is not just a matter of assembling a few building blocks and letting them fall into place. It's going to be a tremendously long and tortuous pathway. And we don't even know whether this was a continuum, that is, that we can imagine maybe over millions of years, a chemical brew becoming progressively more and more complex over time, or whether the origin of life was more like a phase transition in physics, that there's a critical threshold of complexity and then suddenly, boom, it's like a gas bursting into flame, something like that. We don't even know. Most likely, it's a combination of those, that there would have been a very long pathway with sudden jumps with this or that properties that we associate with living beings forming like phase transitions. But we don't even know how to start thinking about it. So the problem of life's origin is actually very, very deep. There's been almost no progress on it since 150 years ago. Darwin, who refused to be drawn on the subject, said one might as well ask about the origin of matter. He said it's mere rubbish thinking at this time of the origin of life. One might as well think about the origin of matter. Well, of course, we physicists have now solved the problem of the origin of matter. We've done that one, but we still haven't, we're very far from solving the problem of the origin of life. Now, in addition to life's complexity, there's a more fundamental issue at stake. If you go to physics or chemistry department, if I ask most of you here, what is life, you'll probably give me a story in terms of things like matter and force and energy and molecular binding affinities and entropy and a lot of things of that sort that we know and love. But if you go to a biology department, you'll get a very different answer to the question, what is life? There you'll be told that life is all about signals and transcription and transduction and translation and coding. In other words, it's about information. So biologists think of life as an information processing system. Physicists and chemists think of life in terms of matter and force and energy. You might think, well, how can these two descriptions coexist? Who is right? And the answer is, well, of course, they're both right. They're complementary descriptions of the same phenomena. And that's good enough. Biologists can talk in information language, physicists can talk in matter and force language. But when we're dealing with the origin of life, somehow we've got to make the transition from the world of forces and matter and molecular reactions to the world of information processing. And whenever we come up in science, come up against two completely different conceptual schemes describing the same basic phenomena, that's where the progress lies. And so John Wheeler, the great gravitational physicist in the United States, liked to say that revolutions in science owe more to the clash of ideas than the steady accumulation of facts. So it's in that spirit that I'm going to tell you about the research that we're doing at the Beyond Center at Arizona State University to try to understand life in terms of the physics of its information processing. Now let me give you an analogy. This is a screenshot of my computer a couple of years ago. That's my wife there, Pauline, and you see we had this romantic trip to the Taj Mahal in India. And there's some other stuff on the screen as well. And so you'll all be very familiar with a computer screen looking like that. And that's Windows. I'm sorry about Mac users, but there we are. To me, Windows seems like magic, just like life seems like magic. I think, well, what is going on with this Windows thing? It's truly magical. All of this has happened just in my lifetime, and we take it for granted now, but think about it. I mean, it is like magic. And so, supposing you wanted it explained, how would you go about that? How would you find an explanation for Windows? Well, you could go to a computer sciences department. Now, if you spoke to a computer engineer, he might turn the computer over, take the back off, and show you something like this. And the story might be, well, there's some copper in here, and some iron, and some silicon, and it's sort of connected together in a complex way. We haven't figured out all the details, but we're really learning an awful lot about the innards of this amazing, magical device. And if we drill down and we look very carefully in the silicon, we can see that there are patterns in there. We think that's a clue to how Windows works. And give us another 20 years and we'll give you a complete account for how Windows works based on what we can find in here. Well, of course, that's a silly thing to say. This is the hardware of a computer, but you know that in order to get a complete description, you need the software as well. You need to go and talk to a software engineer about the coding that has gone into the computer. And so, same thing with life. The chemistry, I've got nothing against chemists, but the chemistry is the substrate in which life performs its magic. That's the hardware. But we also want the software. And so I'm going to talk about the software of life, which is basically its information processing capabilities. So who do we talk to we talk to the chemist. Who do we talk to for the software? Well, you go and talk to a computer scientist. For example, John von Neumann, who thought very deeply several decades ago about the nature of life and analogies with the computer. And so he had the notion of a self-replicating automaton, a self-reproducing machine. He had the idea based by analogy with Turing's a Turing machine, which is a universal computer. A Turing machine can compute any function which is computable. So he thought, imagine you had a machine that could make, within some sort of universe of objects, that could make anything that could be constructed. But the point is, including itself. So it could not only construct anything it was instructed to do, it could make a copy of itself and a copy of the instructions to insert into the product. So his great insight was that it wasn't enough, like a 3D printer, to just crank out a copy of something. You had to also make a copy of the instructions, and these had to be inserted into the progeny. So for von Neumann, life is an information replicating and management system. And this view of the nature of biology has caught the attention of the former president of the Royal Society, the Nobel Prize winner Paul Nurse, who a few years ago, in a very visionary article in Nature called Life, Logic and Information, made it quite explicit that the future of biology really lies in its analogy with electronics and computing. He says, we need to describe the molecular interactions and biochemical transformations that take place in living organisms, and then translate these descriptions into the logic circuits that reveal how information is managed. This analysis should not be confined to the flow of information from gene to protein, but should also be applied to all functions operating in cells and organisms. In other words, to view life like an electronic circuit or a computer circuit in which there are modules that have functions, they perform logical operations, and they're wired together in a particular pattern. And that wiring may change over time. But basically, they do what they do because of their circuitry. Of course, it's not electrical circuit. Well, it is actually, to a certain extent, electrical circuitry, because a great deal of the crucial processes of life depend on the transport of protons and electrons. But basically, it's a molecular circuit. Now, that view of the nature of life is taken very seriously by many biologists, and this is a particular example which was worked out by the late Eric Davidson at Caltech. This is the gene regulatory network that controls the development of the sea urchin. And he put all this together with his colleagues, and this is basically the circuit diagram. So the circuit here, the components consist of genes. Genes can be on or off, and when a gene is on, it can sometimes switch on another gene or switch off another gene. So they can activate or inhibit other genes, and they form complex networks that control, in this case, the sea urchin development. And so there are a number of examples that have been worked out now in which these gene regulatory networks have been nailed down in a lot of detail. And the reason that's appealing to a physicist is because to describe a gene as on or off is like a computer. It's a binary thing, ones and zeros. And so this can be described to a first approximation as a Boolean network. And so we've been looking at Boolean networks. We haven't done the sea urchin. And I say we, this is the research group involved. And in particular, I want to draw your attention to the work of Sarah Walker and Hanju Kim, who've done most of the clever stuff that I'm going to tell you about just very briefly. The central hypothesis we've developed is that that life can be characterized by the way it manages and organizes information. And by that I mean the flow of information, the storage of information, and the processing of information. You can make a list of the informational hallmarks of life, and you'll be familiar with them. One of these is digital information storage, the A's, G's, C's, and T's that we have in DNA that store the genetic information. That's a digital language, and it's in code as well. There's a universal genetic code that translates the information contained in DNA into the 20-letter alphabet needed, amino acid alphabet needed to make proteins, 21 letters. There's a lot of analog as well as digital information processing going on in cells, and having to do with concentrations of chemicals and signaling molecules. I've mentioned that the information is encoded. That means it's context dependent. And let me just give you a simple example. A few years ago, people began talking about junk DNA. What they really mean by that is strands or parts of DNA which are non-coding. The parts that code for proteins are only a small fraction of all the stuff that's there. Just like von Neumann had in mind this universal constructor, well, life as we know it is pretty much like that. The ribosome can make any peptide for which it's provided with instructions. And so if you just take some gobbledygook string of A's, G's, C's, and T's and feed it into a ribosome, what it cranks out is going to be a useless peptide. It won't fold to form a protein with functionality. So the point about this is that a string of nucleotides, A, G's, C's, and T's, just at random, that means nothing. There has to be a context, there has to be a molecular system that can interpret and indeed decode that sequence to do something with it. On its own, the information is useless. And so that notion of contextual information, or semantic information, or information that means something, is a long way, a far cry from Shannon information, which just counts bits and makes no reference to the, in a communication channel, no reference to what the message might mean, or how it might be coded or decoded. It just is the efficiency of transmission. And so we need some further concept of information to fully pull this together. The other thing is that, and I'll come back to this, the dynamics of living systems is quite unlike the dynamics that physicists are used to, where you have universal fixed laws of nature. The laws of physics are fixed. The states of the world change from moment to moment. That's been a founding dualism, a founding fundamental principle of physics ever since Newton, that there are immutable, universal laws of nature, but changing states. In biology, that doesn't work, because as the states of biological systems change, so do the rules that govern them. So we need to investigate a new type of dynamics in which the dynamical evolution is a function of the state of the system. It's very hard mathematically to get to grips with that, but some people are trying to do that. And so that represents a new pathway to complexity, state-dependent dynamics. Notice I don't say time-dependent dynamics, it's state-dependent. That's really important. Of course, if the state changes with time, then that means it's effectively time-dependent, but we want the dynamics to be a function of the state. And the other thing is that life clearly involves both what we call top-down and bottom-up causation. That is, if we're trying to trace a chain of causation, I've mentioned one example, the idea of a gene being switched on, and this has consequences if it makes a protein, and the protein then causes a change in a cell and maybe a change in an organism. That's the bottom-up chain of causation. But there's also a top-down, the physical microenvironment of the cell. For example, the shear stresses, I'm going to give an example shortly. The shear stresses on the surface of a cell can affect the gene expression of the cell. That is, that the global shear on the cell can bring about gene expression, that's genes turning themselves on or off down at the DNA level. That's called mechanotransduction. And it's much studied in cancer biology because of the fact that cancer cells, their mechanical properties are very different from those of healthy cells. They're generally stiffer, for example, but they can dramatically change they're generally softer, but they can dramatically change their Young's modulus according to their microenvironment, if they're in the bloodstream or in a tissue microenvironment. So they're very adept at changing their Young's modulus by up to an order of magnitude. And so this issue of mechanotransduction is a very important one in the study of cancer. Let me tell you some explicit results before moving on. Keep an eye on the time. The case study that we've been doing over the last couple of years is to look at the cell cycle of yeast. There are many types of yeast, and we've looked at two, the fission yeast and the budding yeast cell cycle, and the gene regulatory network that controls that. And there are 10 genes, and the wiring diagram was worked out a while ago, and you see it there. The green lines represent, if I've got this around the right way, activation, and the red lines represent inhibition. And so some people have worked all this out, and so we just took that wiring diagram and treated that as a Boolean network, ones and zeros, according to this simple update rule, that if the system is in a certain state, then at time t, then at time t plus 1, it's in this state here. The details don't matter. The point is that you can just crank it out. It's very simple. You take a table, you take a starting state, which is the known gene state at the beginning of the yeast cell cycle. So that's known. And you put that in, and then you crank through those rules, and it recapitulates each stage of the cell through the cycle. And then you get back to where you started. So all that works very well, just in terms of a Boolean network of 10 genes and 10 proteins and a particular starting state, and away you go. It's been found that there's something called a control kernel, that is 4 of these genes seem to call the shots. That is, so long as these 4 genes are in the correct state at any given time, it pulls the rest of the system into the expected state. So even if something goes wrong in the cell cycle and one of these genes is in the wrong state, it'll get pulled back into a basin of attraction by the control kernel. And so you can explore this. You can start out in all 1,028 initial configurations, and they all, with the exception of this, they all converge down on a basin of attraction. So all this is a very nice idea, and it raises a whole lot of questions. We'd like to know whether there's something distinctive about biological networks, the way they process information, compared to just random networks. If you made a network with the same number of edges and nodes, and you just randomly connected them, would that process information in the same way, or is there something that is picked out? And if that is the case, has evolution selected for certain informational motifs? That is to say, there's this whole problem about what is, how do we know that something is living? How do we recognize life when we see it? And of course, traditionally, we look at the morphology, we look at the shape and the behavior of organisms, we look at their physiology, their anatomy, to determine whether or not we think they're living. And that's a physics way of doing things. But what I'm talking about here is their informational architecture, not their physical architecture. And if I could see the world through information eyes, so when I look at you, instead of just seeing, the flesh of the people here, what I would see is a whole lot of information. I'd see, presumably, information swirling around in the neural information up here. I'd see information in the endocrine system, signaling molecules going through the body, and I'd see information in the DNA and the RNA and the proteins. It would be a ferment of information, and it wouldn't be random. I would notice there'd be certain patterns. Of course, neuroscientists do this all the time with fMRI. They notice certain neural patterns, and they use that to identify whether a patient might be in a vegetative state or might be conscious or dreaming or so on. So we're used to the idea of informational motifs, informational patterns, giving us a clue as to what's going on inside. I'm suggesting that there are fundamental informational patterns that separate life from non-life. If we just took a mishmash of chemicals and attached bits of information, it would be pretty much random. But biological organisms are non-random, and they process information in certain ways. So we're conjecturing that there are universal informational motifs. We've looked at the cell cycle of yeast, but we think that maybe those same information patterns would be found in other organisms, and indeed other forms of life. If there is life on Titan or Enceladus, maybe we're going to find common informational patterns. So this is a whole new way of thinking about biology. We don't think about it so much in terms of the physical stuff, but in terms of this other sort of virtual world of information processing that's going on inside. It's obviously just as important as the chemical processes. And then there are certain questions that physicists like to ask. So, for example, can these informational motifs be characterized by some sort of scaling laws or some other type of mathematical criteria? This is another conjecture that I've had, which is that in the cancer research that I've been doing over the last 10 years or so has led me to think that cancer has its own informational hallmarks. That is that we can recognize cancer by its many distinctive physical properties, but I think it has distinctive informational properties as well. And I pointed you to a basin of attraction with the cell cycle of yeast, so that's a useful concept to have. I think that a healthy cell might, in some very generalized sense, have one basin of attraction, and a cancer cell be another basin of attraction. And so something tips the cell from one into the other. But it's a stable, the cancer cell is a stable basin of attraction. And it will probably be something like the wiring diagram I've told you about, the way that the genes are wired together in the gene regulatory network, gets rewired to form this other stable state. And one of my colleagues, indeed, has found in a case study that the topology of the gene regulatory network controlling certain cell processes changes between healthy and cancer cells. So indeed, something like this seems to be very important. But very few cancer biologists know about this stuff or care about it. They don't think in terms of information networks or informational motifs or cancer having hallmarks or characteristics by their informational patterning. But I think it could be a very important diagnostic tool. That's just a conjecture. I have very little evidence for it. So I don't want to belabor you too much with technical details, but I will just go very briefly, in case you're wondering, well, what are these networks? So take a model network of just 3 nodes, and here the solid line means activation, the broken line means inhibition, and we've just got 3 nodes, and we start them off in the state 111, so they're all on, and go through 10 steps, you see, so that one's gone off, and so this time step 2, we got 0, now 1, 1, and so we're just applying the rules to the network as we go, and you just go down through this cycle like this, and we've got 10 steps. What does that tell you? Well, now, these are just 1s and 0s, but this table here can be used to quantify the processing of information in this simple system. There are many definitions of information applied to networks. I'm not going to go through them all. I'll just mention one that's called transfer entropy. And the transfer entropy is basically a way of telling that if you have a particular gene or a particular node in the network, and it's got a particular state, so here that state is 0, and if you look at the preceding state, say go back 3 steps, knowing that was 110 gives you some information about how likely it is that this is a 0 or a 1. But it doesn't give you complete information. If I just told you 110, without knowing the whole network, you couldn't be sure that that's 0, but you might be able to make a guess. It might be more than a 50-50 chance. Transfer entropy tells you that by knowing the state of another node, that gives you more information. So it captures the idea that in order to tell what a particular node is going to do, its time series, you can refer to other nodes in the network, and that gives you more information. And if that improves your ability to predict what is going to happen, then in some sense some information has been transferred from one part of the network to the other. So that's called transfer entropy. It's got a formal definition, the usual sort of log p things. You average over stuff. I don't need to go into it in detail. It's all in the literature. In case you were interested, we published all these things for example, in the example I showed with A, B, and C, the flow of informational entropy, if you like, from A to C, you see, comes out with a specific number, 0.2857, whereas there was none between A and B. The interesting thing here is when you take a network, the wires connecting the different nodes represent direct physical interaction. But the swirling patterns of information live above that they have their own dynamics. And so whilst when we think of causation, we tend to think of very much at the physical level. If you change something here, it has knock-on consequences there. We can also give a description of the informational patterning. And this may be very different. And it's rather like what philosophers call the mind-body problem, that we can give an account of what's going on in our brains in terms of the neural signaling taking place on a very large scale. But we can also give a causal account of, for example, a train of thought, that one thought leads to another, leads to another. And so we have these sort of 2 levels of description, the informational level and the neural or physical level. And I think this is quite a general thing, that once you get networks wired together, networks of information flow, then you begin to build up a story just in terms of the dynamics of the information, which is not independent of the underlying physical network, but somehow takes on a life of its own. And that's what we're after. We're after trying to explain life. We want to explain somehow how this quality of being alive, somehow it's instantiated in physical matter, but it somehow has a life of its own. It has a dynamics of its own. That's what we're trying to get towards. So here's our hypothesis. Richard Dawkins has coined the metaphor of Mount Improbable for Darwinian evolution. What has to happen over millions of years is that life has to climb Mount Improbable. That is, if we look at living organisms now, they seem very, very improbable objects or systems. How did they get there? They got there through many steps of climbing up that mountain. Sometimes this is called a fitness landscape, that the higher you climb, the fitter you are. But Darwinian evolution has to work gradually, step by step, and so each time you climb the mountain, it's like a ratchet, it has to be locked in, and there has to be a pathway from the bottom to the top. Well, just as there is a physical Mount Improbable, and I'll give you an example, wings or eyes are obviously useful, they appear all over the place in biology. It's very easy to see how processes might amplify the acuity of vision or amplify the efficiency of wings, something like that. Of course, that's easy to see. But I think there's also like an informational Mount Improbable or a virtual Mount Improbable where natural selection acts on the informational patterns just like it acts on the wings and the eyes and so on, to amplify the efficiency of information processing. It would be very surprising if that didn't happen. But it's not really considered by most biologists because we don't see the information. We tend to forget about it. But obviously it's going to be a very important part of the life story, how natural selection acts on that informational resource. Here's a scaling law that came out of our cell cycle of yeast by looking at the transfer entropy. And this is just a plot of the transfer entropy and the rank. That is, how many, between pairs of nodes, how many have 0, how many have 1, and so on. And this is what you find in that's the fission yeast, and then this is the budding yeast. And you see it's different from random. The blue and the green represent two different ways of looking at random networks, scale-free networks and Erdos-Renyi networks. And so these are, what this is demonstrating is that real budding yeast is a network that has a different type of scaling law from just a random network. So that's a clue. I'm just going to mention a few other things and then stop and take some questions. I mentioned about state-dependent dynamics, and a very good way of investigating that, and we have a student, Alyssa Adams, is devoting her PhD to this, is using a cellular automaton. Many of you here will be familiar with that. It's just an array of pixels. Most people like to play with something called the game of life, which is a two-dimensional cellular automaton. This is a simpler one. It's a one-dimensional automaton. It's just a row of, go back, it's just a row of pixels, and then you start out in some arbitrary state, and then there's an update rule according to whether the neighbors of the pixel are filled or empty. And there are 256 of these rules, and all worked out by Stephen Wolfram in his famous book. And you can just play this game. You start out in some state, and then you crank it forward, and you get these interesting looking patterns. Well, people have been doing that for decades. The new feature that we've introduced is what I mentioned earlier, the idea that the update rule, the dynamics, should be a function of the state. And so we evolved the cellular automaton not according to a fixed rule, but a state-dependent one using a coarse-grained measure. And the goal of that is to generate open-ended complexity, because everybody knows that living systems are complex. I've told you that. And we know that things started out simple and somehow became more and more complex. But the point about complexification and life is it's not enough to have a chemical mixture that forms some complexity and then stops. It's got to go on forming more complexity, and more complexity has got to climb Mount Improbable. So what we need is a mechanism or a pathway to generate open-ended complexity. And this is one way of investigating it. And what we find is with state-dependent rules, in a very small but special subset, of state-dependent rules in one-dimensional cellular automata, we do indeed generate open-ended complexity. Now, because these are finite state systems, they'll have a Poincare recurrence time, so they don't go on, eventually they'll come back to where they started. And so the hallmark of this is whether the system continues to increase its complexity right up to the Poincare cycle time if it had a fixed rule. We found cases where that does happen. A couple of other things I want to mention. Constantino Salis earlier gave a very nice lecture on the non-additivity of entropy applied to living systems. And so when we're using concepts like, as I did, transfer entropy, we're talking about now the possibility of state-dependent rules. We have to generalize the notions of entropy that we're applying. So I think that's a very useful concept. These are some of the patterns which have been generated by this state-dependent rules. I'm not going to go into the details, but some of these, as I mentioned, have open-ended complexity. Well, to draw this to a close, I want to mention where we started, which was Schrödinger and his conjecture that quantum mechanics or some post-quantum mechanics might be powerful enough to explain biology. And indeed, there's a subject that's struggling to exist called quantum biology, and it's undoubtedly the case that here and there quantum mechanics plays a non-trivial role in biological systems. One example is in photosynthesis, not just the fact that it's a photon involved, but the transfer of the energy from the light harvesting complex to the reaction complex takes place with extraordinary efficiency and rapidity, that it was conjectured that there's some sort of quantum beating or quantum superposition that is enhancing that process, and indeed that seems to be the case. The experiments done by Graham Fleming in Berkeley seem to support the idea that there is some non-trivial quantum interference effects being exploited in photosynthesis, and indeed this has even made an appearance in Ian McEwan's novel Solar, so the idea of quantum biology. The other example that people like to talk about is the avian compass, bird navigation, particularly the European robin. The experiments have been done, and so just in a nutshell, very briefly, the hypothesis here, and it's taken very seriously, is that there's a particular type of protein, a particular molecule in the retinas of these birds with a fixed orientation, and that light can excite them and form a radical ion pair, which then it could be at a singlet state or a triplet state, and according to the orientation of the Earth's magnetic field relative to the nuclear magnetic field of the ion that's been created, the precession rates will vary. And then when the radical ion pair recombines, it makes a neurotransmitter, and the proportion of neurotransmitter that gets made depends on the angle between the protein in the eye and the Earth's magnetic field. So it's a sort of convoluted story, but it is taken very seriously. And the third example is that Drosophila, the famous fruit flies, appear to be able to discriminate. They can't actually sniff superpositions, but it does appear that they can detect vibrational states of molecules. And so the way you do this is if, for example, supposing the flies like Chanel number 5 and go to the right, well, if you deuterate, you replace the hydrogen in Chanel number 5 with deuterium, then the flies get confused. So chemically they're identical, but their vibrational levels are going to be slightly different, and there is some evidence that flies could do this. And so what we'd really like to know is, are these examples of quantum biology just like a few quirks here and there, where nature has evolved to the quantum age and has exploited organisms have evolved to the quantum age, and nature has exploited these quantum effects to gain some advantage. Is that all that's going on? Or is it, like Schrödinger believed, that quantum mechanics is absolutely fundamental to explaining the nature of life itself? Of course, in a trivial sense, quantum mechanics is essential for life because quantum mechanics explains chemistry and life is based on chemistry. What we want to know, though, is are the ball and stick models of chemistry adequate to explain all biological processes? And the answer seems to be no, not all. But the jury is out over whether the correct answer is not any of the fundamental processes, or whether, on the other hand, it explains 99.9% of them. So we don't know if these are just a few little quirks, or whether there's something more going on. That's an open question. The final thing that I want to throw at you is that, I mentioned this already in passing, the physical forces can affect gene expression. So you're physicists, we like to deal in forces. What's that got to do with life? How do physical forces affect what goes on inside a cell? And I gave you one example of mechanotransduction, where shear stresses operating on the surface of a cell can affect the gene expression. We have a research project with Mike Levin at Tufts University, and this is particularly fascinating because he's investigating electrotransduction. This is where electric fields, more precisely electric membrane potentials, can affect gene expression. Now, as you probably know, living cells that have a membrane, there's about about a half a volt potential difference across the membrane. It's maintained by pumping protons out of the cell, and also across the mitochondria there's a potential difference. This is absolutely crucial to the functioning of the cell. What Mike Levin has found is that by changing that membrane potential, he can alter the development of organisms. He's looked at frogs, and he's looked at salamanders with tumors and limb regeneration and so on. What I'm showing you here are little worms called planarium worms, and they're fun to play with because if you chop them, they have a head and a tail, I should point out, and if you chop them in half, the tail grows a head and the head grows a tail. And you just keep on doing that. It's very interesting. I asked Mike Levin, do they ever have sex? Do they do it that way? And he said, yeah, they do, but they prefer to be chopped up. So anyway, what he can do by manipulating the membrane potentials is to create two-headed worms. In fact, he could do four-headed worms, but two-headed worms and two-tailed worms. And you might think that the two-tailed worms would be really stupid compared to the two-headed ones, but apparently they get on just fine. Anyway, the point about this is what happens if you take a two-headed worm and chop it in two? Do the two heads both grow tails? And does it go back to the normal phenotype? And the answer is no. The two-headed worm chopped in two makes two two-headed worms, and the two-tailed worms makes two two-tailed worms. So you could have an entire population of two-headed worms or two-tailed worms. And if you came from Mars, you would swear that these are different species, but they have identical DNA. It's just that there are different genes being expressed. That's called epigenetics. And the question is, we know that genetic information is stored in DNA. Where is that epigenetic information stored? Where is that patterning information? You can come up with the same problem with limb regeneration, or even the liver. You can take away 90% of the human liver, and it'll regrow, and it ends up the same size as before. Where is that information stored? So that's a mystery. Last thing I want to mention is a colleague of mine, Cheryl Nickerson, in the Institute of Biodesign at Arizona State University. She sends microbes into orbit, and their gene expression changes in microgravity. You might think, well, why would anyone do that? And the answer is, our microbiomes, I'm sure you know, that most of your cells are not you. They're the bacteria and archaea that live in your gut and other parts of your body. And now, you go into orbit, if these microbes express different genes, then it could turn out that something which is benign here on the surface of the Earth could become a pathogen when you're in orbit. So you could get sick in space because the microbiome that you take with you into orbit expresses different genes and turns into a different phenotype and then becomes dangerous. That's the reason. So she's working with NASA to experiment with this. And these little critters, they can tell that they're in microgravity or zero G. They know, and they express different genes. So even something like G-forces can affect gene expression. So it's another example of the relation of forces to life. So I'm going to finish now, because what I've been telling you is that we're tantalized by the idea of a life detector, that there could be something maybe based on the informational patterning, something of that sort, that would discriminate life from non-life and would answer that question. If there's a continuous pathway to life, how do we know how far along that pathway that we're getting? And so I do foresee a time, if these ideas work out, in the not too distant future, when it'll actually be possible, as in the case of Frankenstein, to look at the meter and then declare, yes, it's alive, it's alive. And I think I'll stop there. Thank you very much. Happy to do questions. I think I used up the hour though, but I don't know if we can just have a couple of questions.
Good afternoon. If you were to use the transfer entropy studies in these Wolfram rules which you showed, would you arrive at results which would be intermediate between Derdish-Rennie and life, or would it be closer to one or the other? And I have another small question. In the beginning, I was intrigued because when you separated life from non-life, you included computers and the internet in the life. So could you explain that too?
Yeah, sorry, what was the second question?
In the beginning, one of the first slides,
yes,
when you put life and non-life, you put computers and the internet on the life side.
Yes. That was actually Sarah's slide I was using, and we have long discussions about what should be considered living. And is a computer, which is a product of life, should that be categorized as living, like the non-living shell of a crab? Well, not a crab, but snail, something like that. Should we consider that living? And we think probably you have to extend the definition of life to an entire ecosystem. But sorry, your first question referred to the Erdos-Renyi.
Yeah, if you studied using your transfer entropy method,
yes,
these Wolfram rules.
Yeah, but you're
in comparison to the Erdos-Renyi.
What I was showing there was for the gene regulatory network of the cell cycle of yeast, okay, and not the state-dependent dynamics as modeled with a cellular automata using the Wolfram rule. So they're two okay, different topics.
Hi. One of the problems of observing or understanding the origin of life is that it's hard to observe.
Right.
As you have infinite time budget.
Yeah. A long time ago.
Yes. So, but when you look at a cancerous tumor, yes, it has many of the features of life.
That's right.
Which is they are adaptive, they're very hard to kill, they are subject to evolution, and so they grow. And they can be seen as a way of life emerging, not from non-life, but from different type of life.
Right.
So have you tried to characterize these tests for lifeness and non-lifeness to tumors, these transfer entropy or something else? And if you have, what have you found?
Yes, that's an entire lecture. I've, with my colleagues, have been developing a whole new understanding of the nature of cancer, which is that it is like an atavism or a throwback or a reversion to an ancestral phenotype, representing life at the transition point from single to multicellularity, which is about 1.5 billion years ago. We published several papers on this, and one test of that is to look at the genes, the so-called oncogenes, which are expressed in cancer. And what we found is when you make a list of these oncogenes, you can get them from a database called COSMIC that's produced by the Sanger Index, then divide them into dominant and recessive, and then you can ask what are the ages of these genes by looking at another database that looks across thousands of species and looks at the convergence point in the past. And because cancer is found in all multicellular organisms, including corals and fungi and even simple organisms like Hydra get cancer, it clearly is something that goes back to the origin of multicellularity between 1.5 billion years ago and 1 billion years ago. And sure enough, many of these cancer genes are very ancient. But more interestingly, when you look at what the genes do, they're highly enriched for a number of different functions, but one of these is known as adaptive evolution, that when bacteria are stressed, they have a means of tuning their mutation rate. They can basically turn up their mutation rate and evolve solutions to problems. And it seems that a subset of these cancer genes are homologs of those bacterial genes. And so cancer, the standard theory of cancer is that it's the creation of genetic damage, say radiation or chemical damage or something like that. I think that's entirely wrong. I think cancer is a pre-programmed response to a stressed environment. So the cell finds itself being bombarded by radiation or in a poor tissue environment or hypoxic or something, and it upregulates that sort of ancient subroutine, evolve me out of trouble, and it becomes cancer with its famous mutational instability and ability to evolve resistance to therapy. So we've published all this stuff.
Then we will have the last question. We don't have too much time.
Thank you. The standard Wolfram cellular automata,
Yes.
when you consider the line T, it depends on what happened on line T minus 1.
Yes.
And you go on
Yes.
forever. But of course, a trivial generalization would be that line T depends on line T minus 1, T minus 2,
Yes,
T
indeed.
minus 3, and so on, with a kind of decreasing power law towards the past.
Seems to have
Maybe some, have you ever considered the possibility of something like that be interesting for life or for intelligence or something?
Yeah, well, we have. We've considered a very large number of possible generalizations. The one we've focused on is this state-dependent update rule. Because the other thing is you can look at not just nearest neighbors, but nearest 2 neighbors or 3 neighbors and so on. And so there's a very large number of things you can do. And this stuff is rather computationally intensive. And so every time you think up a new rule, you know, the student's got to sort of run all this stuff. And then because the behavior of the automaton depends on the initial state. If you've got, you know, say 20 cells in your automaton, then there's you know, a staggering number of different combinations of initial conditions you could have. So investigating this systematically, one of the big problems for all of the stuff I've been talking about is simply the very large amount of computing power you need to be able to find any sort of regularities emerging. So what you're suggesting is certainly a very good idea, and if we get a big enough computer, we'll give it a go.
Okay, so then let's thank again Professor Davis.
so that we can start very quickly the activity. So Dr. Roger Falcone is here. Wait. So Chris Rosso, where is he? I don't see him. Chris Rosso is there. And then I ask also Valentin Nesterenka. So the ones of you. So I ask the audience, please, for those who are going to attend to this round table, to take their places, and then we can start organizing it. So the idea, just to introduce the subject, the idea of this round table, which quite unusual in our meetings, I don't know, in meetings abroad, was a student that came to me, and he asked what he should do for his graduate studies. So I asked my question, if a bright student comes to you and is a student that has a very broad range of interests, and ask you which field he should choose for his graduate studies and professional life. And my answer to him was, well, I don't have a broad enough field of knowledge to advise you. But then he said, but you are the president of the Brazilian Physical Society, so you should talk with your friends and see what to do. Obviously, many of you may feel that it's not politically correct for a representative from a scientific society to select fields that look more promising or for research in the next 2 decades. However, we also know that in many occasions, the students or young researchers pick their field not by a very careful selection, but somewhat by inertia. So doing what their teachers did and the friends did, and that's the way it goes. So that gave us the idea we discussed in the committee to organize this table and calling people from institutions. So the first one I talked to was Christopher Rosso. Then I tried the idea with him. When was the meeting? PS in March, right? End of March. And I thought he would say blunt no, but after 1 week or so he said yes. So then we thought that maybe that could be, this meeting could be assembled. So, and then we had Martin Durani from IOP, and Celso Pinto de Mello. He's representing then at the table, he's presenting the Latin America Center for Physics, and Roger Falcone from APS. We never met, we met, clearly. We met in the March meeting, actually, before he came here. So the discussion is going to be quite open. So each one of the participants, they are going to make a short presentation, okay? There's the time. I'll try to, since you are four, between 10 and 15 minutes. And, well, I forgot to introduce to you. Where is Valentin? Well, you can take a chair, Valentin, or there is a chair there. So Valentin Esterenka is from the Joint Institute for Nuclear Research in Ljubljana. So we are going to have also the opinion from Russia here, right? So all countries are present. I could not find someone from China or Japan to come. So that's the idea, and then I will start in the order that I invited. So, Chris, you're going to be the first. Yes. If you want to see his presentation, sit there, then I call each one of you at time. Maybe it's more convenient, okay? You can sit there. We reserve the front here for you if you want to sit there to watch his presentation. Okay? Or look here, because it's going to be here also.
Okay. Thank you very much, Ricardo, for inviting us for this discussion. I think, I hope it will make it lively, and so that everybody understands some of the aspects of the future of physics. Now we are just mixing. It's not my presentation here. And I think first I would like also to say it's fantastic that we can participate to this 50th anniversary of the Brazilian Physical Society. And I will be very happy at the end of my talk to give you a little present, so you can already enjoy before. Okay, so I will try to talk about a few things from the perspective of the European Physical Society. I'm the president of the European Physical Society, and I will repeat my name. It's Christophe Roussel, and I am a condensed matter physicist, and I've been working a long time at IBM Research in Zurich. So I will present you a little bit some of the aspects also about the future related to information technology, basically what you would expect. So I need to have a switch somewhere. This will be this one. Okay, so you see the title. It's very impressive when you look at the title and say, okay, perspective of the development of physics. This is the title we were supposed to talk about. And I think it's important to realize that it's talking about perspective, not talking about the physics in 100 years from now. So this is typically the outline of my short presentation, maybe 10 to 15 minutes. And you see, I'd like to present quickly the role of the EPS and also the culture of scientific research, because I think this is a very important issue. What do we have to do and how do we have to behave as scientists? I will present to you also the Horizon 2020 Framework Program, which is the largest program attributing money in Europe. And then we'll talk about physics in 100 years. Don't worry, I'm not looking in a crystal ball trying to tell you what's going to happen. But I will refer to an article that I just read in Physics Today. I got the information the other day. Now, the second part will be the coming trend from an IT, information technology perspective, the cognitive area, the Internet of Things, and the future will be warm. So you see this map shows Europe, and this is every country in blue a member of the European Physical Society as national society, which are 42 countries, and representing globally 130,000 physicists in Europe. We have also individual members because we are a learned society, and these are 3,500. This is much less than the Brazilian Physical Society, but the purpose of our society is slightly different. We have also associate members from the industry, from large-scale facilities, collaborating societies from all over the world, And finally, let me just tell you that the headquarters of our society is in France, in Mulhouse. What are the roles of EPS? Of course, enhance the cooperation between all the national societies. You know, it was created in 1964. It was Cold War. It was very important to make a link between the East and the West. So the Eastern countries were trying to be integrated, and much, much before the time when the wall disappeared between the East and the West part of Europe. Now you can see some of the priority that we are looking at in areas of common interest in funding fundamental research, because this is where we are, what we need essentially ourselves. Also, we discussed issues on science and innovation programs, education, equal opportunity, and you can read, I mean, also what is very important, my point, as a person from the industry to link the, make the link between the academy, the academia and the industry. And of course, to develop North-South cooperation. Another things which we have to do is to do some lobbying or represent essentially physicists in Brussels, where you have a government, the European government and the European Commission, and we have opened an office in order to be more closer to the people from the government. It's not an easy, because it's a big jungle, I can tell you there. Okay, so the policies is basically to represent most of the physicists in Europe and be present for policies. And also I'd like to just show you that in fact we want to represent the point of view of physics at the different levels, science and research, down to European cooperation, physics and economy. In fact, we published statements or a study about the importance of physics on the economy, and you will be surprised how many jobs are created by physics, because physics is in fact everywhere in the industry also. Okay, so the activities of the European Physical Societies are to organize conferences like this one, to be excellent in science, to create also community services, basically integration, also equal opportunity between women and gender equality. We have a strong effort into physics education. We were specifically involved in the Bologna process in Europe, which was to implement the master and the bachelor programs. And also we have a lot of projects related to education and sponsored by and paid by the European community. So we publish, we have a magazine like Physics World, which we will see, and we have also our Europhysics letters, which is highly regarded, but unfortunately having an impact factor which is a bit too low, which is very difficult for us to survive maybe. Outreach is important. You have all heard about the International Year of Light, which was last year, and it was a very important initiative which was also started by the European Physical Society. My predecessor, John Dudley, did a lot of work in this, and we have also historic sites representing very important areas where the history of physics played a very important role. Okay, the scientific culture, let me just say a few things. I mean, the first thing, I believe it's very important to have high quality research, to be rigorous, original, and ethical. Ethics in science is very, very important. I think it will be even more important in the future, where social media and internet allows you to do copy-paste and you know, to get data from other colleagues. Peer reviewing will and have to remain the important part. Dissemination of science, outreach, will always influence the way we behave and also the way we are perceived, because if we do a good outreach, the public will be very happy with us and will provide more money to science. We have to go and follow good practice. We have also to show that the society can be beneficial. I mean, we can benefit from our research, not just as a fun in science, but also because it has some applications. But we have to be sure that everything which is related to research is also not detrimental. I mean, which is related to innovation is not detrimental to basic research, which I show on the bottom. Okay, so some important issues, I believe, which we have to address is the phasing out of physics as a school discipline. This is a very important point in Europe, that nowadays in the primaries, in the secondary schools, they basically want to teach general science and more multidisciplinary curricula. And so this is something which is detrimental for the development of physics. The freedom and independence of science is also something very important. In fact, the taxpayers, as I say, they want to sometimes to force scientists to follow some trends and so on. And we have to be very sure that we are very independent in our research and also from the funding agencies. Political correctness is something which is important. And I will just go with bibliometric and scientific assessment. We can discuss that later on. Also for large collaboration, you know, if you publish a paper with 1,000 co-authors, how you deal with that. And this is some issues which are basically relevant for CERN, for large-scale facilities. Okay, now quickly about the Horizon 2020. It's a 70 billion initiatives over the year 2014-2020. And you see it's part of the total budget of the AU, which is 960 billion euros for this global agenda of the organization. You can see the key objectives. Because of the lack of time, I will just go to some of the priorities which are of these working programs. And you see that there are priorities which are listed here, basically about sustainable food security, energy efficiency, smart and sustainable cities. These are all kinds of issues which are very important for the European government. And also now we have a triple O, which is the program for 2018-20, which is about open innovation, open science, and open to the world. In fact, Europe has to open to the world. We're competing with the world, but we have also to collaborate with the world. Okay, something happened? Okay, no. Okay, quickly, the coming years. You have seen here maybe this picture, which was published in Physics Today. And it's Frank Wilczek who made comments about what he's expecting about the development of physics within 100 years. And you can read the fundamental question of the future will be profound, sophisticated, and difficult to answer. And the great projects of the future will be grand indeed. And he has another thing which I picked up. It says, over the past 100 years, the pace of foundational change in physics has slowed, while the pace of innovation that physics support has quickened. Both shifts reflect the achievement of reliable, comprehensive standard models. So it means now basic science is going slower because we have developed already many, many tools, but the innovation, the production of technology is gaining in pace. And also, he says, the end of physics is not near, and you can read it, and you can see that at the end he says, brilliant prospect lie ahead. Okay. So, I think I don't know how much time do I still have. You have to tell me. I don't want to take the time of the other colleagues, so let me just see some development in physics. I mean, of course, there will be further progress in relativistic quantum field theory, the unified forces, and so on. This is the strong, weak, and electromagnetic forces being unified. This is something which still have to evolve. The proof, the understanding of dark matter and dark energy, I think this is a very open question. And we have to follow up on gravitational waves. We are very excited that we have observed them this year. The exoplanetary, tactile, and inverse astronomy. Tactile means sending spacecraft outside of the solar system in order to expand our civilization. Maybe not to send people, but at least to give a sign of our civilization outside the solar boundaries. And then quantum and neuromorphic computing, body-like machines. This is the most important things, I think, which will have an impact on our society, is the fact that we have a new type of computing. We had heard at this meeting many talks about quantum computing in optics or in using qubits. And I think this concept will be very important because we have also to think about the human perceptions. And you know, the picture you have seen before, it was a picture of a man with infrared picture. So if you can define and get more interfacing, you will see the world in a very different way because you will have maybe more perception by having added micro electronic devices to your brain or whatever. Okay, so quickly I would like to end by saying it will be the future of the cognitive area. I mean, there will be the Internet of Things which will be developing, and the future will be one. And let me just say basically that we are going to be living in a state where we'll have a huge amount of unstructured data, which means you need some special computers and cognitive computers who are going to be able to find out all the different correlation in this data which are produced. And you can see the numbers here are talking about, you know, in healthcare, government, education, and utilities data. Typically, there will be about production of 80% to 85% of unstructured data, which are enormous. And of course, now, Internet of Things, you all know about it. It will be a huge market in the future. There will be millions and billions of money which will be invested there. And of course, for a company like IBM, it's a good point to work on it. Okay, I will just quickly say the cloud will be the most important things. I mean, for IT organization, we all know that everything is already stored on the cloud, that they will be managed on the cloud. And finally, I am saying the future will be warm in the sense that all of us will be interconnected, not just by the smartphone that we have, but also by you know, some kind of a smartwatch, and also you can see here clothing which are intelligent, so that they have sensors, they have energy production involved, and so on. So these are all kind of sensoric which will be developed, and you can see also on the right the tennis racket. So maybe my conclusion is to say EPS as an organization or as a society is an important player in Europe. I'm not saying in the world, but I hope that we can collaborate also in the future with the Brazilian Physical Society. Physics will be challenged in developing responsible research and innovation for solving issues which are very important for our society. I think this is something which might be new. And then thanks to the cloud and the IoT, the future IT technology will become more instrumented. And finally, new cognitive computing tools will be needed to treat the ocean, the tremendous amount of unstructured data. So hopefully with this I gave you a very quick overview of what are the perspective from the European side and also from the side of the IBM company. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chris. Now I learned your name correctly, Rosel. So I challenge you in the future to pronounce my family name correctly also. So, so the next one, Martin Durani from IOP. I also thank him for accepting to participate in this roundtable.
Hello, can you all hear me? Wonderful. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak today. It's my pleasure to talk to you all. I'm from Physics World, which is published by the IOP, the Institute of Physics, and we have a very close connection with the Brazilian Physics Society. A couple of years ago, we published this magazine, Science Impact, showcasing some of the great work that goes on in Brazil. If you don't know who I am, I did a BSc in chemical physics at Bristol University, and that's where Cesar Lattice, one of Brazil's most well-known and respected physicists, discovered the pi meson with Nobel laureate Cecil Powell. And of course, he didn't win the Nobel Prize, which is, I think, a shame. I think he deserved to have taken a share in it. I then did a PhD at Cambridge with Athene Donald, and she was one of the first female physics professors in the UK. And I've been editor of Physics World since 2006. The Institute of Physics is based in London. It's a leading scientific society which has been going since 1874. And very much like the EPS, we support physicists around the world. We have a membership of 50,000. And that picture there is the new headquarters of the Institute, which is based in North London, very near to the Crick Institute, which is a big new institute opening in a couple of years. IOP does a lot of international activities. One example, we're helping to support an entrepreneurship workshop in Sao Paulo next month. IOP Publishing is wholly owned by the Institute of Physics. We're based in Bristol, and we publish 70 journals, ebooks, magazines, conference proceedings, websites. Very much an international company. 95% of our journal authors come from outside the UK. And there are some of the journals that we publish, And next year we're celebrating 50 years of the Journal of Physics series. We have a very good ebooks program that started a couple of years ago. If you're interested in contributing a book to that, please let me know. And Physics World, there are some of our covers from the past couple of years. We cover all of physics, and what we try and do is take a journalistic approach to physics. So we try and cover physics through articles and video and podcasts that are timely, authoritative, accessible. We try to attract top authors and writers, and we cover all of physics all over the world. And one example of that is through our special report series that we publish. We've done 8 so far, including a special report on Brazil from 2013, when partly based on the visits that I made, and I see Constantino Salis there. He invited me to the CBPF in Rio, and I gave a talk there. We have a series of focus on issues based on physics-based technology, which is also very, very important for physics. And Physics World celebrated its 25th birthday a couple of years ago, and we used that opportunity to look at the future of physics. So I'm going to draw on a couple of lessons that we've learned to talk about my perspective of the future. So we picked 25 different things. 10 of them were looking backwards to the 5 biggest discoveries over the last 25 years, the 5 best images over the past 25 years, but we also looked very much towards the future. And one of the things we did was to ask ourselves the question, what are the 5 biggest unanswered questions in physics? Now, as journalists, we love lists, and everyone loves a list. And it would be interesting for you to draw up your own lists, and these are the 5 questions that we came up with. So number 1 was, what is the nature of the dark universe? Number 2, what is time? Number 3, can we unify quantum mechanics and gravity? Number 4, is life on Earth unique? And number 5, can we exploit the weirdness of quantum mechanics? And if you want to read about any of these, they're all in the 25th anniversary, which you can get by downloading the Physics World app. So we think these are some of the really big questions that will excite the next generation of physicists. They're going to excite people in the room. They're going to excite the public. So those are our 5. We also looked at the 5 spin-offs from physics research that we think will have the most potential to change our lives over the next 20 or 25 years. So we picked 5. The first one was in medicine. We've heard of proton therapy treating cancer, but we very much feel that there's a very great future for hadron therapy using larger ions, larger nuclei than protons. And one particular way to do that will be using laser-driven acceleration. At the moment, there are some hadron therapy facilities, but they need large accelerator facilities. Using laser-driven acceleration, it could create compact sources for treating people who have cancer. The second big area was graphene. We all know about the great potential in electronics. But interestingly, graphene also has a potential in purifying water, because it can create, you can use graphene as a filter. There are other areas such as prosthetic limbs, DNA sequencing, and as Christoph, I think, mentioned, the European Union has a €1 billion flagship program in graphene, underlying the very great importance of that material. The third area we think is quantum technology. Quantum cryptography could create very secure communication, super fast quantum computing, particularly for studying biological systems. And again, the European Union has launched a €1 billion flagship program in that area. Now, the fourth area are negative index metamaterials. And you've all heard of things like acoustic and light shields. That could be a potential use of these materials. But one other very interesting way is using the metamaterials for super lenses, and also as perfect lenses that can go beyond the diffraction limit. And the fifth technology spinning off from physics, we think, lies in energy technology. battery technology is going to be very, very important. As Christoph said, everything's on the move, everything's wearable, you need battery power to support many of those things. And one particularly interesting thing we think is triboelectricity, using the energy harvesting devices that capture the movement of the body to power, for example, your mobile phone, or if you're a soldier on the move, to power your backpack. Of course, with all predictions, I could be wrong, and we all know that Ernest Rutherford uttered that famous phrase at the 1932 meeting of the British Association in Leicester, saying that anyone who looked for a source of power from transformation of atoms was talking moonshine. But there are very many other things. For example, I found one from this guy, the president of 20th Century Fox in 1946, casting doubt that television would be a success. The final thing I wanted to talk about was the changing social face of physics. And that's how physics as a discipline will change socially. And again, we picked five things that we think are going to change. And one of them is there'll be a much greater trend for interdisciplinarity. I think that's going to be really where the great advances are going to be, are when people from different fields come together. And I think the other great important thing is diversity in physics, not just in terms of people's gender, people's sexuality, religion. And in March, we did a special issue of Physics World on this topic, and I think that's going to be very, very important. In fact, one interesting thing we came across in that, while creating that special issue, is the concept of diversity, particularly in panels on conferences. And as you can see, actually, we're all men on this panel, and there is a website where you can enter the fraction of women in a particular community and calculate the chances of having a all-male panel by chance, and that draws attention to the level of diversity in physics. The third way that physics will change socially, I think what's also very, very important, is to improve the way we communicate with science. And a very, very powerful technique is through video. And Physics World does a lot of videos, but there are plenty of other people that do some very powerful videos that really will attract the next generation of people into physics. The fourth way that physics will change socially is to increase the public involvement, for example, through citizen science projects. And there were some fantastic examples across the whole of science. It's a real great way of getting people involved in science, not just talking to them, getting them involved. And finally, very, very important, I think, is to develop closer international collaboration, especially with physics in emerging nations. And I think that could be one very, very important way. And we've all heard of the Perimeter Institute in Canada. Neil Turok, who's the director, has a great program called Einstein from Africa, looking for the next Einstein in Africa. Thank you for listening.
Okay, so we thank Martin. And now the next one was Roger. I think we talked in the March meeting, right?
Okay. Terrific. I want to thank you for inviting me, and it's been a fun conference. Also got to see some other physics in Brazil. We went to Campinas and saw the new light source. I'm very excited about that. So I want to say first that I'm very pleased to participate in the conference, and we want to congratulate the Brazilian Physical Society on 50 years. We have connections between the American Physical Society and Brazil. In specific, we have an exchange program that we think is looking very, it's very forward-looking in the sense that it encourages young people, postdoc students, and some faculty to come across the borders and talk to each other, experience each other's laboratories and ways of thinking about science, and we want to see that Brazil-US exchange program, which has been going for about 6 years, expand. For example, we had a Young Physicist Forum at the 2016 March meeting, which was co-sponsored by organizations here in Brazil. And essentially, it helped postdocs and early career scientists build interdisciplinary and international networks, and there was a significant participation at that meeting. The two societies exist to do a lot of things that we've heard about wonderfully in the last few talks. Those societies have to have direct programs where coordination can happen so that they're not working independently. And we've tried to do that through reciprocal membership agreements where privileges, including submission of papers to conferences, it can be done seamlessly. We have about 160 members of the American Physical Society who are from Brazil. And importantly, our publications work with the American Physical Society provides a venue for publication of science, for peer review of the science from Brazil. And there are about 800 papers submitted each year. About half of those are published, and that's the result of peer review. And it accounts for about 2% of all our published articles in the American Physical Society journals. We have an international counselor from Brazil on our APS Council, which is our governing committee for the American Physical Society. And we also have a program. Dr. Amy Flatten is here at the meeting with me. She is our director at the American Physical Society of International Affairs, and she is here in the front row in case you have any specific questions about the programs. I know many of you in the audience know her from the past activities. So, what's the nature of our society? Why do we have a society? Why do we charge dues? I would say we come down to a few specific areas. One is that societies are volunteer-based, and that's true of physics societies all over the world. It relies on physicists or scientists for other societies actively making contributions to the work of the society. The majority of the work gets done by volunteers. That means we have to be doing important things to capture people's attention when they're very, very busy. For us, the volunteers take the form of the leadership of the society, the presidents, vice presidents, and so on, but also our council, advisory committee, and all of the different topical units and forums that are organized into sub-disciplines. I would say core functions of our society are publications and meetings. That's where our financial commitments are. Disseminating the information through publication is, of course, the essence of the nature of science. Publishing it, peer review, and repeatability are all important, and that's why publications just are at the very top of our intellectual activities as a society. And secondly, meetings, because it isn't enough to just publish papers, we have to talk to each other. So making meetings that are appropriately priced for young people to go, putting them in the locations where people can go, making sure there's international connections that are made, absolutely crucial to the success of science as a venture. And so those are the core functions that we pay enormous attention to at the American Physical Society. There are, of course, other activities and programmatic areas that we've heard discussions about in terms of education, strengthening physics teaching, and mentoring. I would say that's taking on increasing importance for our society. Public affairs, talking to our government and advocating. We're not allowed to call it lobbying, we just call it advocacy and education. But that is absolutely critical and how I spend a lot of my time. International affairs, clearly, even though we are the American Physical Society, we are an international society. And science doesn't particularly respect borders. Sometimes in funding it does, but the nature of the science we do is international. And of course, outreach to the young people in K through 12 is a part of our, we're always looking for new, clever ideas to enhance education for our youngest scientists. We're located on the East Coast in the United States, in Maryland, in Washington, D.C., and on Long Island in New York State. So there are actually 3 headquarters for American Physical Society. Critical issues facing us. So I chose not to talk so much about what the future of science would be, but I agree with all of the very interesting topics we've heard about before. But critical issues facing the nature of scientific societies, as I see it, is one, we have to do a better role in advocating for support for funding for science. I don't think we do it well enough now in terms of articulating the benefits, the societal benefits, the economic benefits that we talk about, but the sheer number of jobs that we'll be able to create in a society which is becoming increasingly technological. I don't see any other solution to the economic divide that is so prevalent throughout the globe right now. That economic divide, as you know, is broadening. I don't see another solution other than science and technological training for people. That's where the jobs will be, and that's where people will be able to contribute. So we have to make the argument that science and technology is critical to addressing that global threat of certainly the economic divide and certainly climate change. We believe that there have to be technological solutions. They're not going to be just societal choices. They're going to have to be technological solutions that we haven't thought of yet. And also international security, both at our own borders and then globally. Those threats are emerging, continue to increase in a society where nuclear weapons, for example, are going to be available much larger, in a much larger way than they are right now. So all of these threats, I think, have technological and underpinning science contributions. Open access is absolutely critical to our societies, to the professional societies. The financial parts of societies are very much involved in publishing, and if we are to do what we want to do, which is to provide access to the general public, free of charge, all of the research that we do that has been funded by them, and every government that I know of in advanced societies has made the commitment to making available scientific publications free of charge to people sometime in the future. That open access is absolutely critical, and we need to figure out how to do that in a way that's affordable. So this is a huge challenge for us, and not only the scientific papers, but the data we generate, because people like to massage data, look at data in a different way. The LIGO project is an excellent example of that, where there are many people not associated with LIGO that would like to get their hands on the LIGO data to explore it for different types of science. We need to figure out how to make that happen. Certainly supporting scientists across the spectrum of universities, national laboratories, and industries. I always think of that as a kind of Venn diagram of how science works. And we need to look at the support for scientists at the universities, at national labs, and at industry in a seamless way rather than thinking of them as independent pillars. Communicating with government decision makers, we mentioned. The balance between facilities and individual grants. This is a huge issue in the U.S., and I assume it is in Europe as well. Facilities in many of our agencies are supported with 60% of the funding for science, and individual researchers are getting 40%, and we kind of have a balance. Is that the right balance? Is it sustainable at that level when large facilities are becoming increasingly costly? We have to leave room for individual innovation, funding individual scientists with brilliant ideas, and yet we have to make funds available to maintain the large research facilities like the new synchrotron here in Brazil without bankrupting the individual researchers. And then helping the public understand the issues, which I just have little icons for down here that we've talked about. Finally, our membership is about 50,000. I think we're maybe half the size of the European Physical Society. And yet, so in two interesting trends. One is we don't have too many seniors. We have a lot of young people, and that's a good sign. Okay, our graduate students and our postdocs and all that, and undergraduates, a huge percentage of our society. Okay, so that's great to have a very youthful component to the society. And the international part is a huge component of, if you look at the international categories here, a large part of the American Physical Society. The published papers, again, huge number from out of North America. Here, publishing is an international enterprise, and so APS Publishing is a global enterprise, and we have to pay attention to that. Finally, the suite of journals, to remind you, Physical Review Letters are our flagship publications here, but we have a lot broader of special interest publications. And finally, we are a member organization. Scientific societies are member-driven organizations, and we have to learn to respond to all our members, not have a small group of leadership making decisions, but feedback to the society is critically important. We have to represent what scientists as a whole, what the community would like us to do, and so we take that feedback very seriously. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, thank you. So thank you, Roger. Now I invite Celso to talk in the name of this Latin America Center for Physics.
Thank you, Ricardo. Well, it's a pleasure to be here in this round table. Of course, I'm substituting for the director of class, Professor Carlos Trayero. The battery run out. Okay, so you go by finger. Okay, Professor Trayero should be here, but we had a problem of agenda. Next one, please. And at this moment, he's in Montevideo participating at another meeting, and he asked me to be here present his talk. So as a matter of fact, he sent me his talk over the weekend. I just did some editing, and then I add a couple of biographies at the end. So let's talk about the activities of Latin American Physics Center. By the way, I am the Brazilian representative at the CLAF's Council, so that's why he asked me to be here. Next. Okay. So, for those of you who are not familiar with CLAF, starts with a little history of CLAF. Has more than 50 years and was created at a time of after the Second World War, when people believed, that was the belief after the success of science, that the linear model, you put money in science and things would come out for it. So the background was the creation of CERN, and also there was a concern in Latin America to integrate the science community and try to avoid the brain drain. The idea that was behind the creation of NSF in the United States, at Brazil, the funding agency, CNPq, CAPES, the idea is to integrate, to put money in science. And at that time, the Latin American community was very small. And UNESCO has also provided some help, as a matter of fact, more political help to make fair the things to happen in, Brazil, in Latin America. And two trends were important. One was mentioned here in a previous presentation, the almost Nobel Prize of Cesar Lattes, the discovery of pi meson. As a matter of fact, experiments were done in Bolivia, with the creation of Cosmic Ray Physics Laboratory in Bolivia. Was a very important moment for science in Latin America, also for the integration of science in Latin America. At that time, we had so few people working science and physics in Latin America that we could now count on the fingers of one hand. But those were giants. Oops. Again. Okay. Okay. And that the initiative of Marcos Moschinsky in Mexico, Leite Lopes in Brazil, Jean Biage in Argentina, the three of them, they were fundamental people for establishing the scientific community in their countries. Leite Lopes in Brazil with a few others. But the three of them were the founding fathers of CLAFI. And CLAFI has really started with the initiative of the three of them. 50 years later, the scientific community in Argentina, Brazil, and Mexico is completely different, and this generation was responsible for that. And so Leite Lopes was able to convince Brazilian government with UNESCO to create this Center of Latin American Physics, and was established at Itabaraty, that's the Brazilian Foreign Office, with a mission and a vision. I go fast on this because, of course, it's scientific collaboration. And so the place was chosen could not be better. Rio de Janeiro, very inspiring city for Brazilians and foreigners, and the location is also wonderful. So, of course, CLAF is hosted in CBPF, and the director of CBPF is there, but I can invite you in the name of CBPF to visit CLAF, to those of you who don't know CLAF. Here comes the problem, because 50 years later, we have several member countries, and you can look at you can see that the level of scientific development is uneven. That's a problem with Latin America. That's a problem that CLAF is trying to help. And we still have a few countries that do not participate of CLAF. So it would be very important if the physics community in Latin America could increase and strengthen the collaboration between all those countries. So a few considerations about the coming years. We have in Latin America 20 countries with a large population, a large area. We have countries as small as El Salvador, as large as Brazil. But we have several geographical divisions, but we have something that unites us. The language barrier in Latin America is not very strong, because we can easily communicate between Portuguese and Spanish, and of course, other languages. It's very easy to the communication and collaboration between those countries. So I go to the final part. So what CLAF is doing? The fundamental diagnosis is that, I'm trying to find there's a point, but it doesn't matter. We still have a large gap between different countries. In all meetings of the board members, the kind of requests we get from different countries completely different because of the uneven level of the science in these countries. So it's very important that the most rich countries like Brazil, Argentina, and Mexico could help to fund CLAF and to strengthen the collaboration between all those countries. But the emphasis has been always in training and upgrading human resources in physics, the exchange of scientists and students, and support schools and congress and so on. So CLAF is trying to work with focus points. At the moment, we have in development a new lab, the Agua Negra deep underground experiments that's focused in high energy physics and involves a collaboration that involves Argentina, Brazil, Chile, and Mexico. I am not expert on this, but there are people here that will explain better the Agua Negra. And also, recently, a lot of agreements have been made between CLAF and CERN, and also with UNAM in Mexico for Unidad the renewable energies. Yeah, unit for that is something that's being started. And a few agreements with American and European university and institutions. And also the idea of Latin American Physics Olympiad. Anyway, now comes, that's the end of Tariero's biographs. I just have two more things to say. Is that my experience work with CLAF the last couple of years is that we have to find ways of supporting CLAF and strengthening the collaboration, because it's, in my personal opinion, is not healthy to have so completely different stages of development between neighboring countries. We could, as Brazilians, I'm talking about Brazilian scientists, we could do better to help to strengthen this collaboration and to conciliate the different scientific agendas of countries like Chile, Mexico, Argentina, and Brazil have a more modern agenda, and other countries have problems even in education, and there's a lot of consolidated experience in Brazil, Mexico, Argentina that could help in the development of science in those countries. For that reason, the Brazilian Physics Society in 2010 established a Latin American physics program, trying to use money from the Brazilian government to try to help this. And Calvão can explain, give more updated details about this. But at least 3 calls for proposals were established for mobility, scientific interchange of scientists and students within Latin America. That was money provided by Brazil, but for use in cooperation in Latin America. Organization of workshops and conference, and also a travel share, senior scientists that could go to present conference and talks all over Latin America. And finally, I think that's the biggest challenge. We're talking about scientific cooperation, and that's supposed joint understanding. It's no secret that in 2016 we have a very complicated political agenda in Latin America. I hope that we could use the experience of CLAF and to use science to strengthen the collaboration and to look for points in common and non-points that divide us. So I hope that the experience of CLAF, the last 53 years, could help us to change the present situation of economic crisis, problems of funding, and establish a more fruitful collaboration with the countries of Latin America. I thank you. Thank you.
After that, I invite Valentin to come to talk, and so at the end, I'll open for questions, okay?
Well, I wouldn't pretend to present Russia, even Russian science, because it's too much for me. Yes, but I will provide for you some short information about our institution. This is Joint Institute for Nuclear Research, which is placed in Dubna, in Moscow region, in Russia. And our institution is located in the town Dubna. This is something like 100 kilometers from Moscow. This is actually Dubna represents not only Joint Institute for Nuclear Research, but also we have university. We have rather big education center inside the institute, so as a result we have enough young people. And also we have some special economic innovation zone where you can do business without taxes and so on, and you can realize your innovation ideas. And this zone is also very popular. We have firms from Russia, from other countries, from Japan, and so on and so on. Well, first of all, now about our institution. This is some international organization which has been created just 60 years ago in response of socialistic countries to creation of CERN. So CERN was created in 1952. Our institution was created in 1956. Now we have 18 full members, which are mainly former republics of the Soviet Union and East countries and East Europe countries. And we have also associated members, Egypt, Germany, Italy, Hungary, Serbia, South Africa. There are two kinds of membership, and maybe this associated membership is much more flexible because you can concentrate on some specific projects and use correspondingly much less money. This is international organization which is not governed, not supervised by Russian government, but it's supervised by the special committee which consists from the representatives of the countries. Budget is about $200 million, and this staff member about 5,000 people. We have very wide collaboration with different scientific centers, maybe collaboration with 700 scientific centers in the world, and with more than 60 countries. And we have very nice examples of such collaboration. For example, the collaboration between the United States, Germany, and our institution in discovery and exploration of super-heavy elements. This is indeed long-term collaboration, and it's continued now. And basic scientific directions: high-energy physics, nuclear physics, condensed matter physics. If to say about perspectives and maybe mainstreams in our activity, this is first of all active participation in various CERN experiments, including those in LHC, Atlas, and so on and so on. Also, we started some new mega project, NICA. This is some complex of new accelerators, and this is for investigation of quark-gluon plasma. I will tell you about this a little bit more later. Then also, now in our institution, we create a fabric of super heavy elements. Also, we have facilities for investigation of hollow nuclei. We have pulse reactor for different kinds of nanophysics, and we have also various theoretical physics. Our institution has 7 labs. The first lab, Gelepov Laboratory of Nuclear Problem. This laboratory is just concentrated mainly in collaboration with CERN. Next laboratory, Florov Laboratory of Nuclear Reaction. Here the main activity, just discovery and exploration of super heavy elements. Then we have Wexler and Baldwin Laboratory of High Energy Physics, where NICA project will be realized. Next laboratory, Frank Laboratory of Neutron Physics, where we have pulse reactor, and here we have, I already told you, nice opportunities for different kinds of nanophysics. Laboratory of radiative biology. We have maybe the largest laboratory in the world of theoretical physics. The staff member is something like 250 theoreticians. Actually, we cover practically all the directions in the physics. And we have Laboratory of Information Technologies. This is also very important because, for example, this laboratory was chosen as, this laboratory has some grid system which is used to store the data from LHC, and this laboratory provides very quick access to this data. Only in the world there are only several such centers because requirements are very strict. Access, the interruption in the access shouldn't exceed several seconds per year. So this is indeed very strict requirements. So this is a general structure of our institution. I already told you that our institution has long-term activity in discovery of super heavy elements, and as a result, 4 elements of periodic table have names related to Dubna. This is Dubnium 105, Fluorovi 114. Fluorov was the first director of the laboratory where just this element were discovered. Moscovium, this is 115, and Oganessian. This is quite new name. Oganessian, this is a still active physicist, and he did a lot in this area. So at least 4 elements of periodic table have names related to Dubna. Next point, I already mentioned mega project NICA. This is nucleotron-based ion collider activity, facility. This is some new accelerator complex. It's designed in our institution. And the aim is investigation of the nuclear matter in the region of the maximum baryonic density, and in particular quark-gluon plasma and phase transition from hadronic sector to quark-gluon sector, and so on and so on. And also one of the aims, this is investigation of the nature of spin in nucleons and other particles. And this facility will operate with beams from protons and polarized deuterons to gold. And you see here the energies from 4.5 GeV per nucleon. This is for gold, and for larger energies for the protons. There will be 2 detectors, multi-purpose detector, just for the investigation of quark-gluon plasma, and spin physics detector for investigation of spin degrees of freedom. And I should say that NICA, this is one of the 6 Russian mega projects. And quite recently, there was a signed agreement between our institution and Russian government, and now Russia pays a lot for realization of this project. So this project is quite realistic. This project is nevertheless international. We have contributions from China, from some members of our institution, and now scientific program is in progress, and everybody who can contribute to this program are welcome to do it. And we plan to start first experiments in a few years. Then also I mentioned already super heavy element factory. You know maybe that some Iceland of super heavy element was predicted in 60s, and there was a huge effort to obtain this experiment, to discover this experiment, these elements in the experiment. This factory just will be used to intensify these studies. This will include a new high current cyclotron and upgrade of several other cyclotrons. Will use these beams, and so it will. We suppose that this will strongly intensify our studies of these super heavy elements. Also, we try to establish a closer ties with Brazil. Anyway, we have already long-term many common projects, but these are like individual projects which are mainly supported by CAPES or SINPQ. This is in the region of ultra-cold gases, condensates, nuclear physics, hadron physics, math physics, and so on and so on. But we would like to intensify this collaboration, and last year we organized forum in our institution, and the aim of this forum was to demonstrate for the Brazilian physicists just what we are doing in our institution, and maybe to establish some cooperation and so on. And I repeat, our institution is interested in intensifying collaboration with Brazil. Any forums are welcome, concrete project or even associated membership. And for example, now we would like to see representatives of Brazilian Physical Society in the sessions of our scientific council. Yes, so us, representatives of this society, will see directly what we are doing. Yeah. So this is actually everything. Thank you very much. I can add maybe without slides 2 words. Yes. We also have in our institution quite effective We have in our institution quite effective forms of collaboration. This is so-called some scientific programs between institute and some concrete country. This program assumes support of small projects. We have such projects with Germany. So this is so-called Gaziberg-Landau program, with Czech Republic, with Poland, with Hungary, and so on and so on. And it's quite easy to get money to participate in this program. You simply get money for 2-3 week visit, and our practice shows that this is extremely extremely effective. Germany is indeed happy because we have a lot of common publications with theoreticians of our lab just by using this program. Also, I should say that we have a very nice education center, and we organize many schools for the young scientists and lectures from all the world, and our Brazilian students and postdocs are invited to participate in these schools, to attend these schools, and we even can provide some financial support for this aim. So actually there could be indeed many different forms of further collaboration between our institution and Brazil.
Okay, we are a bit late, but I think we should open for questions now, because late, not only 10 minutes actually, because the previous lecture took a lot of time. So I ask you please to make the point to whom in the table you are addressing your question, or to the entire table, and make the questions short and objective. So.
Thank you. Maybe to the director of the EPS, but possibly to the whole table, yes. You have discussed that about 40% of the total budget goes to a big collaborations, or maybe it was 60, I forgot. But my point is support for individual scientists. It was mentioned, but there's a practice that well, money typically goes to big groups and to popular people. And I would like to support the idea of having some minimum level or so that goes to small groups. Because small groups typically just in the international globalization, they basically disappear from the table. Can you comment on that? Actually, both of you.
I think it was a question which would be addressed to my colleague from the APS, but let me just say that I fully agree that we should not provide the large money only to the large organization and individual. I've known some department of physics which disappeared just because the smaller university didn't have a chance to be funded. This happened also in Switzerland. So I think this is an issue which is very important. What we have at the European Physical Society is we have a committee for European integration, and this is exactly what we are trying to discuss with our colleagues from Eastern countries, so that they are assured that they get also enough money from the AU, from the Horizon 2020 program and so on. And this was done by having, in some way, it was forced by the European Commission that program which was organized had to give a chance to a country and to some universities from Eastern countries, for example, to receive the equal amount of money. But I think I will give the word to my colleague, because I mean this is what he was talking about.
My point was very specific in terms of our funding agency, the Department of Energy, and the major funder of physics in that group, which is called Basic Energy Sciences. And what we've found over the years is that there's been an evolution of the funding where 60% of it goes to operate major facilities. These are things like synchrotrons or particle accelerators or other major facilities. And 40% of the money is going to individual principal investigators. those individual principal investigators demand access to the facilities. So we're all in this together. It's not one group against the other. It's that we require those large facilities, but it's up to the scientific community to determine that balance. It isn't to be made by government officials. It's just large facilities, telescopes, synchrotrons, particle accelerators are all useful to individual investigators as well. That was just my point. It was reflecting the reality right now where we seem to have gotten to.
Let me see first if there is other questions, so then I'll bring back to you.
There was a distinguished physicist from Austria, Guido Beck. He spent many years of his life in Brazil and Argentina and elsewhere as well. And one day in a colloquium, he said the experiments that Michael Faraday was doing in the back of his house have changed the face of the world more than all the wars of Napoleon. So all this is the laws of electromagnetism that Faraday was trying to understand. He had not in his mind the word innovation, though it already existed in the English language. How comfortable you feel being authorities in the various institutions and physical societies, how comfortable you feel with the permanent pressure on the physicists of the world. It's not only in Brazil. We can see this in the European Research Council, we can see this in the National Science Foundation, everywhere, that we should give so much importance in our activities to innovation, which is something that clearly has a very strong economical component, but maybe it's not what Michael Faraday was trying to clarify. You can.
Who is the first one to dare to answer? Okay, Martin.
No, I completely agree. I think basic research is absolutely vital. However, I think physicists are notoriously bad at imagining what their research might be useful for. Not that they would do it themselves, but to think imaginatively about what the potential applications could be from other people. And if you ask many physicists what would their work be useful for, you will get a blank stare very often. All they need to do is think laterally, think imaginatively. Not that they would do it themselves, but there might be some interesting thoughts beyond their own niche area.
Maybe just one point, it's also a closed loop. I mean, you have basic science and you have some discoveries. Take a laser. When it was discovered, basically everybody says it's just a toy. Nobody was going to use it. I mean, or the first computer, Watson at the time said, oh, maybe the world will use only 4 computers because it's something which is more some kind of an exotic object. And you see how it expanded to, for example, the laser being any product in our society. Everything you use has a laser somewhere. So I think this loop is the fact that the basic research has to produce an impact on the technology, so that the feedback makes that you have a good running economy, which gives the money to do the funding for the basic science again. So if you keep doing only things in your own laboratory, I mean, Faraday, maybe as you said, would have been very great in keeping his things doing on his own, but he needed to have people picking up his idea and to make a product out of it. So I think both things have to be considered.
I just will say it's not for us to decide the fraction that goes to the Faraday-type research to be applied. I would ask the young people what they want to do. And we're finding an awful lot of the young people in science want to do what we call innovation now. And I would give them money. I would give the best and the brightest of them the money. And they may go more in the innovation direction. Maybe they're going to go in the basic science. But I would say it's not for us to decide.
Celso and Valentino.
Okay. Even now we have some examples of the case like with Faraday, you know, discovery of graphene. What you need, scotch and microscope, that's all, yes? Nobel Prize for the discovery of graphene. Anyway, I should say that in our institution there is no any pressure to the scientists to do innovations. Our institution is mainly for fundamental research, and if somebody would like to do any innovation, he has opportunity, because in the same town there is some special zone. Also, there are many specialists around to give consultations and so on. But nevertheless, we don't have, for example, no pressure of this kind. So if you would like to do innovations, you're welcome. If not, you can continue to do fundamental research.
Okay, other questions?
Okay, my question may be IOP, I don't know your name, I don't remember. I am Malheiro from Instituto Tecnológico of Aeronáutica in Brazil. So nowadays, but this in some sense is a problem of how to help for developed countries, okay? So nowadays our Brazilian law even asks for almost all the companies that come to Brazil to create a research center, and they have created. Monsanto has one, Microsoft has another one, Google has another one, and the IBM has another one. Okay, but what happens is that the people that they are hiring, many of them are even PhDs, but are not doing any research. They don't really are doing sometimes really things to essentially create new patents. You can check how many patents these research centers have generated in Brazil. Okay, you can check. So I think that follow and maybe ask transparency. I don't know if transparency is the right word. It is ask for these centers to show what they are doing. If they are really, or if they are what many times hear the people say, I'm not sure if it is correct or no, okay, because I don't belong to that centers, is that okay, the good things they are patented, and then in US if the company is American or in some sense. So really see if these centers are essentially developing the science in the countries really, and why no patent? No, we don't have patents here. Why they are not here? Why? No new discoveries here in our centers, or they are not doing research. So I know. So my idea was: is it possible at least to follow these research centers that have been creating these foreign countries, know what they are doing, ask transparency of reports, at least as societies to check if this is not really only, okay, Brazil asks, so you do, we make, but it doesn't work. So.
Well, although he asked IOP, I provoke Chris to start answering that, because talk about IBM. So maybe you can start with your words.
You know, all the big companies, you mentioned Google and their Amazon and their IBM, they open research centers or science and technology, or maybe it's more research and development centers. I can give you the example of the two labs which have been created by IBM in Brazil in 2010, one in Sao Paulo and the other one in Rio de Janeiro. And of course, all the research which is done there is, of course, focused on some of the main issues which are interesting the country. For example, resources, natural resources, or we have a very strong program at IBM which is also for smarter cities. What can you do to manage a city in such a way that the traffic is controlled, that the security is there, that the resources, the water, transport are optimized. Now your question is to see how transparent are these companies and these centers in order to inform the population. I think you talk about Patent, I mean, you meant intellectual property. Okay, so this is something I just don't know if I can answer it. I just know whether, you know, such big companies, IBM is the largest company having patents in the world, so they are very interested because having information, I mean, having this type of knowledge is something which you can use as money, as exchange, you know. So I just don't know how to answer this question as it's a little bit a political question which I don't think I can address myself. Does someone to say?
You have to be careful about patents because companies will take out patents sometimes for no particular reason other than to tell other companies as a kind of fool other companies into thinking what areas they are working in. So you've got to be careful about taking too many patents out. There was a survey done in the UK about graphene, and there was some companies took out hundreds of patents on graphene, and are they any use? I don't know. So you shouldn't judge the success of a research center on the number of patents it takes out. Good.
Okay. Just a minute. Due to the advancement of time, I'll have the four last questions, I see, but be very, so I have four hands here. I'll leave the last one for the president of Brazilian Physical Society, Professor Billy da Coiler, at the end.
Yeah, I would like to know if we can have by chance for the different societies survey on the interest of the students in going into physics, if this is increasing. Then those students that go to physics, if they finish the undergrad, finish the PhD, and if they have jobs in physics related, academic, in the industry, or whatever. I mean, I want to know how good we are in attracting good people, and if we are able to form the majority of these good people, if the societies have this kind of statistics.
We do, at least in the US, the number of physics undergraduates has nearly doubled since 1990, and the ratio of students who go on to physics careers as opposed to going on to law or medicine or engineering, 50% of our undergraduates go on to things directly in physics and 50% don't. And that fraction has stayed fairly constant. But we are at an all-time high in terms of physics majors right now in the US, and I'm sure that's true in Europe too.
Yes.
You know, what you can do for the young scientists to stay in physics and also to get interested in it, not just men, but also women. We have created within the European Physical Society the so-called Young Mind section, which is the so-called young members of the society. And this is something which is a tremendous success. We have moved within 5 years or 8 years to 35 sections in 20 countries, which are all having at least 50 students who are involved from the universities. So at least this type of programs would be very helpful in order to promote physics in a general way, and hopefully to keep it such that it remain an attractive field of study. But I don't know if I answered your question.
Chris, I think her question, I think we have that in EPS. If EPS has any statistics of the number of students that enroll in physics compared to the other fields and their degree of success.
I'm sure we have it, but I don't have the numbers here.
Thank you. My question is almost the same that her question, but it's for CLEF, the Latin America, and I want to know about the same question about the young people in Latin America. What CLEF is doing about for the next generation of physicists and new young men and young women also? Thank you.
Well, as I told you, I'm here presenting CLAF, not as a director of CLAF, but I would say that we are doing, as I'm talking as a Brazilian scientist who wish the best for CLAF, we are doing less than we should. And the answer is because of lack of money and lack of support from the most powerful countries in Latin America, specifically Brazil at this moment. So we need more support. And as I told you, there is a completely different situation if you talk about physics in Chile, Argentina, Brazil, Mexico, and if you talk about other member countries. And if you go to a meeting, you see that the demands and the needs are completely different. One way to make things more equal is to support the mobility of students. Not in the sense, like in the case of Brazil, that we want people from Latin America to come to Brazil, to stay in Brazil. We don't want a second brain drain. But the most important thing is to create mechanisms for mobility in such a way that we could integrate Latin America. But for this we need money and we need a political decision. I cannot speak for other countries, but I would say as a Brazilian, I feel that Brazil has a role that's not completely fulfilling. I would wish that the Brazilian government would commit more with supporting CLAF and the integration of science in Latin America.
Okay, we are going to have the last question because we have a limit of time. So the last question is going to be by Professor Birita Collier, the current president of the Brazilian Physical Society.
Thank you. So you see, if they invited the Brazilian Physical Society to take part of the table, you'd have a woman. So it's unfair to say. So I have a comment and a question. I would like to know what Celso thinks about this. I would like to go back to the point raised by Constantino. I don't think it's fair to ask physicists to develop innovation in technology. But I think it's fair to ask this to engineers. And from my experience in the United States, I noticed there's a continuum from physics to engineering. There's no gap. The knowledge in physics is passed automatically to engineers because it's, for example, Sérgio Rezende got a PhD in engineering in the United States, and he's in the physics community. So innovation is to be asked from engineers. They do, like the transistor was developed by physicists, but the integrated circuit was developed by an engineer. And I think the problem in Brazil, I don't know in Latin America, is that there's no channel, no natural channel. The engineers are mainly reading manuals of how to use imported equipment. That's the impression I had. I want Celso to comment on that. If you think the innovation in Brazil is lacking, or patents are lacking increasing numbers, because there's no chain of knowledge from basic science to applied science to experimentalists to engineers. And innovation should come from the engineering part.
Well, you ask a very tough question, Belita. There are several ways to try to answer. First of all, I agree with you. One problem is critical mass. Look at physics in Brazil 50 years ago. You know the joke that all the Brazilian physics would fit in a van. If an accident happened on the highway 50 years ago, most of the Brazilian physicists would disappear because we could count. Nowadays, we have a much stronger community. But I agree with you. We don't have the capillarity to go from basic science to the innovation you wish. Of course, this also has something to do with the economy and the kind of project you have for a country. If most of the technology we have here is imported, and we have just a few native labs doing research, then you have the discontinuity that you mentioned. So science by itself will not solve this problem. The other point that we should take in account is that rarely things are black and white. Constantino is not here. He talked about Faraday. But Maxwell's equation came to solve a specific problem of telegraphy. So he was invited to look at the problem of electricity, and he came up with the equations. But the main question is there was a technological problem that people did not know how the cables would rust undersea. And so he was invited to look as a brilliant scientist to solve this problem. Einstein has a patent for a refrigerator. Do you know that? So Einstein, the top theoretical physicist, has a patent for a refrigerator. What's happening? He was looking for innovation, he was looking for what? No. He saw a problem and tried to solve a social problem that was the leaking of gas that was killing people in Europe. So it's very difficult to look at people and say, you do that, you do that. People should do what they wish to do. If you have a large enough community, then the capillarity would happen naturally. And then you have people doing science, doing innovation, and the society would move on. So if you have problems in Brazil, and we have problems in Brazil, in terms of this has more to do with the project of Brazilian society than the Brazilian science. Brazilian science is just part of the problem.
Valentin, I think, I'm sorry, Roger, then I'll pass on to you.
Maybe I would add something. I have some friend in my institution. He started as a physicist from fundamental research, but he had some idea how to do detectors by using neutron sources, detectors of explosive and for drugs. And he simply had some idea. He has found experimentalists, his friends, they created this detector. Nearby there is innovation zone there, so they organized the firm to product these detectors in large amount, to solve it and so on. So I would like to say that a lot depends on the individual initiative, and in this case you can always find somebody who can help you in your innovation. Of course there should be some conditions, like maybe economical zone, many experts around.
To Roger now.
I was going to make a quick comment that having just visited Campinas and looking and understanding how the Sirius facility is being designed, it's the most advanced synchrotron source in the world. The experiments they're trying to do in quantum materials and in other areas, in chemistry and quantum materials, are the most advanced science. And it was just incredibly impressive to see the engineers who were designing that working side by side with the scientists who are setting out the goals for the facility there. I think things are, at least in that one facility, it's really working well.
Okay, now I invite Belita to come forward. Chris would like to make an offer for the Brazilian Physical Society.
Can I welcome you here in the front? I think it's not every year, but we celebrate 50 years of existence of an organization like the Physical Society of Brazil. And in the name of the European Physical Society, I would like to hand over a few things. First thing is a medal, which is something which is made just for recognition, for services. It's something coming from it's unfair, it's just that it's a pleasure. And here there's a book which has been written by Richard Henchman, who is a very famous physicist who lived in 1700 and who wrote a lecture on natural philosophy. And this is not the real book, it's not old, but it's a copy of it. And I think it has been one of the basics of education in physics for over 100 years at that time. And it was written at the Trinity College right. And now since you need, everything goes by 3, this is 1, 2, and I'm coming from Switzerland. What did I bring from Switzerland, you guess? Cheese. No, chocolate. So I have a bag here with some information about the European Physical Society, that let me just grab a big piece of chocolate for you, which you can share with your staff here. And I'd like again to thank you for the warm welcome you have done to all the people at this round table. And I hope, especially for the European, that we can establish stronger links also. I'm not competing with the American, but I think it's very important that you know that we are open for collaboration and also for sharing information.
Thank you very much. I want to share the chocolate with all of you. And I think Galvão deserves all this because I'm just starting. He's been doing all this meeting and all the connections, so I must thank him and recognize how far he took the Brazilian Physical Society. I just hope I cannot take it backwards. Just to keep what he did is a big challenge. So thank you very much, Galvão. I hope you are very successful in the Institute, INPE, with your new job, and we'll keep in touch. Okay, thank you.
I think Amy, I'd like to hand the microphone to Amy Flatten from Physical Society.
Belita, it's a pleasure to welcome you to your presidency. Belita served as our international counselor on our governing council for the APS a couple years ago, and that's when I first met her. So Belita, this is another, well, let me let you put those down. This is another small gift from the American Physical Society to say thank you to the Brazilians and the Brazilian Physical Society for all the opportunities for collaboration. And you don't need to open it now, but it's a small plaque to commemorate and recognize your 50th anniversary and the wonderful collaboration you've had with the APS. Thank you.
Maybe you could come all forward to take the last picture.
Alô?
outorga de título de doutor honoris causa da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte. Convidamos todos, aos que já estão ocupando seus lugares e aos que não estão, que se acomodem, por gentileza, e aqueles que estão portando aparelhos celulares, nós pedimos a gentileza de mantê-los no perfil silencioso durante esta Assembleia Universitária. Obrigado. A Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte tem a honra de dar início à sessão solene de Assembleia Universitária para outorga de título de doutor honoris causa ao professor Harry Eugene Stanley. O título de doutor honoris causa é concedido a personalidades nacionais ou estrangeiras que tenham contribuído de modo notável para o progresso das ciências, letras ou artes e aos que tenham beneficiado de forma excepcional a humanidade, o país ou prestado relevantes serviços à universidade. Desde a sua criação, em 25 de junho de 1958, a Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte já outorgou 135 títulos honoríficos, sendo 49 de doutor honoris causa, 18 de professor honoris causa e 68 de professor emérito. Nesse instante, temos o prazer de convidar para compor a mesa de honra desta solenidade o senhor professor José Daniel Diniz Melo, reitor em exercício da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte. Convidamos também a senhora professora Jeanette Alves Moreira, diretora em exercício do Centro de Ciências Exatas e da Terra. O senhor professor Carlos Chesman de Araújo Feitosa, chefe do Departamento de Física Teórica e Experimental. Convidamos também o senhor professor Claudio Honor Gomes Bezerra, coordenador da pós-graduação em Física da UFRN. E gostaríamos de saudar também a presença da professora Sueli Tavares Rubim de Pinho, chefe do gabinete do reitor da Universidade Federal da Bahia, aqui representando o magnífico reitor, professor João Carlos Salles Pires da Silva. E assim também registramos a presença aqui de diretores de centro, de unidades acadêmicas especializadas, pró-reitores, superintendentes, assessores, secretários, chefes de departamentos, coordenadores de cursos, dirigentes de unidades suplementares, professores, servidores técnico-administrativos, alunos da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte e de outras instituições aqui presentes e demais convidados que nos prestigiam nesta solenidade. A todos uma salva de palmas também. Nós queremos registrar aqui, em virtude desta solenidade, nós recebemos diversos cartões de autoridades, instituições públicas e privadas, diversas nas esferas federais, estadual e municipal, transmitindo seus cumprimentos e parabenizando o agraciado e também formulando votos de pleno êxito a esse evento. Com a palavra, o professor José Daniel Diniz Melo, reitor em exercício da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, para a abertura oficial desta Assembleia.
Boa noite a todos. Eu tenho a honra de declarar aberta esta Assembleia Universitária para a outorga do título de doutor honoris causa da UFRN ao professor Harry Eugene Stanley. Solicito a comissão de honra do professor Harry Eugene Stanley, composta pelas seguintes autoridades: professor Denilson Lins Albuquerque, professor Francisco Alexandre da Costa, professor Liaci dos Santos Lucena, professor Luciano Rodrigues da Silva, professora Suzana Nóbrega de Medeiros, que conduzam o homenageado a esta Assembleia Universitária.
peço para a mesa permanecer ainda de pé e solicitamos a todos para, nesse momento, em posição de respeito, ouvirmos o hino nacional brasileiro. Neste momento, o reitor em exercício da UFRN, o professor José Daniel Diniz Melo.
Solicita ao professor Gandhi Visvanathan que faça a leitura do currículo do homenageado e, em seguida, profira suas palavras de saudação ao senhor professor Harry Eugene Stanley.
Boa noite a todos. Venho saudar o senhor professor José Daniel Diniz Melo, reitor em exercício da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte. Em nome dele, todos os outros autoridades aqui presentes. Currículo de Harry Eugene Stanley. Nasce em 1941, no estado de Oklahoma, nos Estados Unidos, e logo em seguida seus pais se mudam para a costa leste. Completa o ensino médio em um município pequeno do estado de Pensilvânia. Obtém o bacharelado em Física na Universidade de Wesleyan, no estado de Connecticut, em 1962. Passa um ano na Europa com uma bolsa Fulbright, sob a supervisão do professor Max Delbrück, em Colônia, na Alemanha, que 6 anos mais tarde ganharia o Prêmio Nobel em Medicina, em 1969. Obtém, em 1967, o doutorado em Física pela Universidade de Harvard. Inicia um pós-doutorado com Charles Kittel na Universidade de Califórnia, em Berkeley. Envolve-se durante esses anos nos protestos contra a guerra do Vietnã. Em 1968, é atingido por uma bala de borracha da polícia durante um protesto. No mesmo ano, aparece na televisão nacional realizando um gesto marcante de protesto contra algumas políticas do então governador Ronald Reagan, que na década de 1980 tornaria-se presidente dos Estados Unidos. Muda-se em 1969 para o estado de Massachusetts e torna-se professor assistente do MIT. Migra em 1976 para a Universidade de Boston, levando com ele 4 outros pesquisadores. Organiza em 1986 a maior e mais importante conferência de física e estatística do mundo, o StatFis, em Boston. Torna-se membro estrangeiro da Academia Brasileira de Ciências em 2002 e da US National Academy of Science em 2004. É laureado com a medalha Boltzmann em 2004. Tem publicado mais de 1.200 artigos científicos, sendo mais de 40 no periódico Nature e ainda mais no Physical Review Letters. Alcança atualmente índice H, igual ou superior a 128 na Web of Science, o segundo maior índice H do mundo. Finalizando, tem orientado mais de 110 teses de doutorado. Realizado a leitura do currículo resumido, venho agora me dirigir ao homenageado. Jim, vou começar dando uma explicação sobre por que eu estou fazendo este discurso de saudação hoje. Acredite ou não, foi sua ideia a minha vinda para Natal, no ano de 1997, quando defendi minha tese de doutorado. O professor Luciano da Silva, do Departamento de Física da UFRN, tinha acabado de voltar ao Brasil depois de passar um período em Boston, no seu grupo. E ele ajudou a articular a minha vinda a Natal, junto com o professor Leacir Luceno. Portanto, se eu não tivesse sido seu aluno, muito provavelmente não estaria em Natal, logo não estaria fazendo esse discurso aqui hoje. Histórias assim nos fazem lembrar de sistemas complexos e de correlações de longo alcance no tempo e no espaço. Jim, estamos aqui hoje nesta solenidade por um único motivo. Não só eu, mas todos os seus ex-orientandos e seus colaboradores testemunham seu compromisso com a ciência e a educação durante mais de meio século. Vou contar uma história como exemplo. Quando eu era seu aluno de doutorado na década de 90, uma vez eu cheguei na sua sala, no departamento de Física, por volta de 5 horas da manhã, quando a maioria dos alunos e professores estavam ainda nas suas casas, dormindo. Usando a minha cópia da chave que o senhor me tinha dado, eu entrei na sua sala para pegar algumas canetas para transparências que lá estavam guardadas. Ao entrar na sala, que eu achava estar vazia, tomei um susto ao ver o senhor trabalhando no computador às 5 horas da manhã. Entendi, então, o que é ser dedicado à ciência e à vida universitária. Posso contar 1001 outras histórias semelhantes, mas não vou me alongar. Jean, seu grupo de pesquisa em Boston, recebia e ainda recebe alunos e pesquisadores de todas as partes do mundo, inclusive da América Latina e do Brasil. No contexto da UFRN, o senhor tem interagido com professores e alunos do Departamento de Física Teórica e Experimental desde a década de 70, quando o professor Leacir Lucena visitou a Boston University. Vou destacar apenas 3 fatos. Primeiro, desde o início, o senhor sempre apoiou a ciência brasileira de modo geral e a ciência na UFRN em particular. Vários professores, pós-docs, alunos e ex-alunos da UFRN já interagiram com seu grupo de pesquisa. Não vou me arriscar citando os nomes de todas essas pessoas, pois são muitos, e eu facilmente poderia omitir alguém por engano sem querer. Em segundo lugar, o senhor é coautor do artigo mais citado da UFRN na Web of Science. Esse artigo já tem mais de 500 citações na Web of Science. No Google Scholar tem ainda mais citações. Esse fato, isoladamente, já demonstra sua contribuição para a UFRN e para o Departamento de Física. Esse artigo acabou gerando muitos outros trabalhos, que culminaram finalmente em um livro de sua coautoria, que foi lançado em 2011 pela editora Cambridge University Press, cujo presidente, Simon Kaplan, está aqui conosco hoje. Esses artigos e o livro somam a produção científica do Departamento de Física da UFRN e do Programa de Pós-Graduação em Física. Em terceiro lugar, no ano do seu 70º aniversário, no ano 2011, o senhor escolheu a cidade de Natal para realizar uma festa científica, juntamente com o professor Leacir, da UFRN, que também completava 70 anos. Como o senhor tem muitos amigos e colaboradores no Brasil, poderia ter escolhido a dedo qualquer outra universidade em outra cidade para realizar aquela conferência, mas o senhor escolheu o UFRN e Natal. Foi um voto de confiança. Eu poderia citar muitos outros fatos, logo vou direto ao ponto. Jean, o senhor é uma pessoa que alia uma altíssima qualificação como cientista a um comportamento de grande generosidade, cumprindo integralmente sua missão de educador. E mais ainda, um educador que não conhece fronteiras e que revela de forma permanente e entusiasmada a sua missão de ensinar e difundir a física. Eugene Stanley, o senhor mais do que merece o título de doutor honoris causa pela UFRN. Parabéns.
Também gostaríamos de registrar e agradecer a presença do professor emérito da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, Leacir dos Santos Lucena. Por favor, uma salva de palmas. Neste momento, o reitor em exercício da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, no uso das atribuições que lhe são conferidas, outorga ao professor Harry Eugene Stanley o título de doutor honoris causa da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte.
República Federativa do Brasil, Ministério da Educação, Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, diploma de doutor honoris causa. Eu, professor José Daniel Diniz Melo, reitor em exercício da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, tendo em vista os termos da resolução número 026/2015, consune, de 25 de novembro de 2015, do Conselho Universitário. Confiro ao professor e pesquisador Harry Eugene Stanley o diploma de doutor honoris causa, em reconhecimento pelo seu envolvimento, pela sua paixão, pela sua dedicação à ciência brasileira, particularmente à física, e pelo cientista de valor incontestável para a comunidade científica mundial. Reitoria da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, em Natal, 6 de setembro de 2016, José Daniel Diniz Melo, reitor em exercício. Designo a comissão de honra, composta por professor Liaci dos Santos Lucena, professor Gandhi Viswanathan, professora Suzana Nóbrega de Medeiros, a fim de conduzir o homenageado, professor Harry Eugene Stanley, para a posição da veste talar e para o recebimento do diploma de doutor honoris causa da UFRN.
E agora vamos receber uma salva de palmas do professor Harry Eugene Stanley, doutor honoris causa da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte. Nós temos a honra de conceder a palavra ao doutor honoris causa da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, o professor Harry Eugene Stanley.
gostaria de saudar do senhor professor José Daniel Diniz Melo e, em nome dele, cumprimentar todas as autorizadas presentes. Muito obrigado. Venho expressar meu mais profundo agradecimento ao Departamento de Física, ao Central de Ciências Exatas da Terra e ao Conselho de Universidade Federal de Rio Grande do Norte. Muito obrigado também a todos que vieram a esta cerimônia, e uma cerimônia muito emocional. Digo que emocional porque, para mim, o Brasil é um país muito, muito especial. E os brasileiros são um povo mais agradável e encantador do mundo. Fazem 50 anos desde a minha primeira viagem à América do Sul, quando visitei o Chile. Todos nós assinamos uma petição pedindo ao governador para devolver ao Brasil ao povo brasileiro. Durante este meio século, eu tenho testemunhado de muito prazer, entusiasmo. O Brasil fazer muito sucesso em todos os aspectos. Mesmo longe do Brasil, eu lia os artigos de cientistas brasileiros e encontrava de discutir ciências com eles nas universidades onde trabalhei. Visitei o Brasil pela primeira vez 37 anos atrás, em 1979, quando fui ao Rio de Janeiro, convidou o professor Constantino Salas. Eu tinha ficado com tanto entusiasmo como expectativa de minha visita, decidi estudar o português durante vários meses antes da viagem. Venho acompanhado de minha esposa e com 2 filhos pequenos, de 11 meses e de 27 meses. Para minha grande surpresa, todas as pessoas no Brasil amam crianças. As pessoas faziam questão de sempre conviver crianças, tanto os pequenos como também os mais velhos. Apesar do meu estudo intensivo e exaustivo do português, a única palavra que tipicamente precisou usar, obrigado. Quando estávamos nos ônibus, as pessoas locais imediatamente nos ajudavam a levantar, carregar nossa carinha de bebê duplo. O professor Constantino foi laureado com uma bolsa prestigiosa de Guggenheim, que o permitiu trabalhar de qualquer lugar do mundo por 1 ano. Me deixou muito feliz de escolher da Universidade de Boston. Ele foi primeiro visitante em uma estrelada sequência de 18 cientistas brasileiros maravilhosos que passaram pelo menos 1 ano do meu grupo em Boston. Convido a todos os senhores e senhoras presentes aqui hoje para visitar Boston a qualquer hora. Basta um e-mail com as datas de sua visita para eu poder planejar uma visita agradável e produtiva para ambas as partes, e não só do ponto de vista científico. Além das muitas visitas agradáveis do brasileiro de Boston, eu também tenho tido prazer fazer muitas visitas ao Brasil. Talvez o mais excitante foi minha primeira visita da região do nordeste do Brasil, convite de meu irmão científico, professor Lícia Lucena, para compartilhar comigo avanços científicos de altíssimo nível sendo realizados na UFRN. Igualmente especial foi a conferência natal comemorou o aniversário de 70 anos de Lícia, juntamente com meu aniversário. Chorei quando tive que ir embora de Natal. Termino todas as minhas falas com take-home message. Sejam bem-vindos e venham visitar Boston.
Registramos a presença do senhor professor Constantino de Sales, doutor honoris causa da UFRN. E para o seu pronunciamento, convidamos o reitor em exercício da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte, o professor José Daniel de Nismel.
Boa noite a todos, mais uma vez. Eu quero iniciar cumprimentando a professora Janete, que é vice-diretora do Centro de Ciências Exatas e da Terra, da UFRN, o professor Carlos Chesman, chefe do Departamento de Física Teórica e Experimental, o professor Claudio No, coordenador da pós-graduação em Física. Quero cumprimentar o professor Liaci Lucena, professor emérito da nossa instituição. Também o professor Constantino, também doutor honoris causa da nossa instituição. Cumprimentar a chefe do gabinete do reitor da Universidade Federal da Bahia, Suane Tavares Rubim de Pinho. Quero cumprimentar de forma muito especial todos os professores aqui presentes, todos os convidados, senhoras e senhores que vieram aqui prestigiar essa cerimônia. Um cumprimento muito especial ao caro professor Harry Eugene Stanley. Vou baixar aqui um pouco. Foi com grande satisfação que presidi essa solenidade, representando também a reitora Ângela Paiva, em que lhe foi atribuído o título de doutor honoris causa da Universidade Federal do Rio Grande do Norte. Sabe o professor Stanley, e sabem igualmente os que conhecem os rituais da academia, que este galardão é reservado a pessoas muito especiais, cuja trajetória existencial e profissional tenha se revelado exemplar. Nada mais justo em se tratando do senhor, conforme se pôde depreender da rica apresentação feita pelo professor Gandhi Viswanathan, que discorreu sobre sua trajetória como cientista e como animador incansável do ensino da física. Por isso, o Departamento de Física Teórica e Experimental reconheceu, ao encaminhar as demais instâncias o pedido de concessão, a grandeza de alguém que, já tendo merecido a indicação ao Prêmio Nobel, foi agraciado com a medalha Boltzmann, que vem a ser a principal comenda científica especificamente destinada à sua área de atuação, mecânica estatística. Mas, ao fazer tal reconhecimento, agiu o coletivo do departamento com a alegria de ver alguém de sua relação mais fraterna, relação que o senhor e a UFRN iniciaram há 4 décadas, receber mais uma homenagem, mais uma merecida homenagem. Quanto a mim, na honrosa condição de reitor em exercício dessa instituição, que tem uma extraordinária galeria de agraciados com o título que lhe foi otorgado, só posso dizer que me sinto especialmente agradecido pela missão de lhe ter feito essa entrega. E é por isso que, em nome da comunidade universitária que aqui se encontra para aplaudi-lo nesse reconhecimento, agradeço por tudo que o senhor representa e tem feito pela física, pelo ensino e pela formação continuada dos seus professores na UFRN. Boa noite a todos e muito obrigado pela atenção. Agradeço a presença de todos e declaro encerrada esta Assembleia Universitária. Obrigado e boa noite.
O cerimonial solicita que todos permaneçam em seus lugares, por gentileza, até a saída do cortejo de honra e informa que os cumprimentos serão recebidos no hall do nosso auditório. Desejamos a todos uma boa noite. Muito obrigado pela presença.